It is 9:34, May 5th, 2025, and we are starting the first meeting of the Budget Committee. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderwoman Tyus. Alderwoman Sanye. Alderman Browning.
Present.
Alderwoman Velazquez. Alderman Devote. Chair Aldrich.
Present.
Alderwoman Tyus. Alderwoman Sanye. We have 4 present. We have quorum.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, Madam Clerk, members of the committee. Next, I will move to approval of the minutes. Since we have none, we'll move to item number 4, which is Board Bill number 1 that is in front of us for review. Board Bill number 1 is our annual budget bill that we will hear from our budget director in a second, Mr. Paul Payne. First, I want to thank each member of the committee for joining. I know we have some new members and new alders, Mr. Devote from the 5th Ward, as well as a new member, Mr. Browning from the 9th, who is my vice chair, and returning members, Alderwoman Velazquez from the 6th Ward and Alderwoman Sanye from the 7th Ward. I just want to thank you all for picking the budget committee. Just to give like a quick kind of rundown of the budget process. So for people that are watching. So the city fiscal year begins July 1st. Of the previous year, and it ends June 31st. Typically, the Board of Aldermen gets the budget, probably got it after ENA voted it out about roughly 2 weeks ago. So to my committee members, we will have a very ambitious timeline to try to get this budget done out and sent hopefully back to ENA if there's any changes by the 1st of June. Just for more kind of information on the budget process. I know the budget director, Paul Payne, usually have preliminary conversations with departments roughly around January. If there's any changes, I know he continues to meet with them around February. And then typically in April, the budget department submits the proposed budget to the Board of ENA. The Board of ENA is made up of the mayor, the comptroller, as well as President Megan Green. They go through the budget. Typically, after they hear information from Director Paul Payne on the budget, they have one public kind of testimony to hear from the public on the budget, and then usually a week later, they vote it out, and then it comes to the Board of Aldermen. Again, for this committee, I want to make sure that we try to get this done just in case if there are any changes. As we know, if we make changes at the budget committee, any amendments for is decreasing or increasing, they have to go back to ENA. ENA has to either approve those amendments or don't approve them. If they approve them, they have to come back to this committee, and then we have to vote it out and get it to the floor. So I do want to thank all my colleagues. I sent out the schedule for the budget committee for different departments that will be coming this month. If you would like to hear from any other departments that is not on the list, please reach out to myself or my LA Matt Heskamp, who's been amazing with pulling this all together, as well as Ms. Caitlin Smith from the Alderman from the 9th office, who's been very helpful. And I also want to thank Mr. Coleman, who gave us the framework for making sure we can try to get all departments in. So this week we're going to focus on public safety. Today we're going to hear from Budget Director Paul Payne, and then roughly, hopefully around 11, but if it needs to go longer, we'll hear from the public on where they want to see their dollars kind of go. For the following week, just for the public to be aware, on Tuesday, we're hearing from the Mayor's Office, Department of Public Safety, City Emergency Management Agency, and then the Comptroller. On Wednesday, we're hearing from the Building Commission, Excise Division, Circuit Attorney's Office. On Thursday, we'll be hearing from the Fire Department, the Board of Aldermen's Budget, and the Police Department. And also want to thank the Mayor's Office, and I see Dan Gunther from the Mayor's Office, who's also been helpful, making sure that all departments will be coming in front of the committee. So with that, being respectful of everybody's time, I want to bring up Mr. Payne, and also cannot remiss all these thank yous. I do want to thank our clerk's office, Mr. Clerk himself, and also all the clerks that are going to be very flexible, making sure that we have these long meetings to be able to get this budget process done, and we did kind of start early this year. So thank you to all staff members that were a part of this process. With that, Director Paul Payne, if you want to come on up and present an overview annual operating plan of the 2026 budget. For everybody, there's packets in front of you. Also, it's in the Google Drive if you want to follow along, or you can look at our beautiful TV screens to also follow along with the budget director. Whenever you're ready, Mr. Director, you may proceed.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, members of the committee. Yeah, as the chair referred to, there was a packet summary of the budget itself, a presentation which I will be walking you all through. All of this information, both this presentation as well as the documents themselves, are posted on the city's website, so you can find any of these documents online. All right, starting the next, Madam Clerk, are you going to page through those? Yeah, great, thank you. Starting the first page, total annual operating plan for FY26 totals $1.41 billion. That's an increase of 5.4% over the previous fiscal year. And in the table, you'll see how that's divvied up among the various funds that the city has, the largest of which is the general fund at $607.4 million. That's a 4.6% increase. Now, I will specify that this increase is not because of underlying growth. What you're seeing here is that this year we took a big hit, as you are well aware, of the earnings and payroll tax. There was significant refunds activity that we had this year. And so while we don't anticipate that again, we do not have that coming up next year, we will have some ongoing refunds, but it's going to be at a lesser extent. So that's why you see that increase. And we will talk a little bit about what the underlying growth assumptions are and talk about revenues. In special revenue categories, $247.9 million, that's a decline of 2.4%. We've seen declines in the use tax, $7.2 million, gaming, tourism fund, and the sales tax, which I'm talking about in a little bit, which has also declined this year. So that's driving a decline in the special revenue group. Grant funds at $88 million, that's a 36.2% increase. A little bit of a misnomer there. We are appropriating some interest money from ARPA fund. And so that's about $22 million increase there related to that. Otherwise, it would be flat. Debt service fund is $13 million. That's a 19.3% decrease. We do have a potential for issuing an additional, if you recall, a few years ago, the voters approved a $50 million issuance. We issued at the time $21 million, and we time it for whenever the levy falls off, so as not to have an increase in the property tax. We do have that opportunity later this year to do that, and would anticipate that we could take advantage of that to get some more capital investments done. In the capital improvement fund, $61.4 million is a 24.3% decrease, almost entirely because of the fact that the operating surplus from the prior year was about $36 million. Half of that was $36 million. This one is 21.2, still a healthy number, but it's smaller than what it was last year. So that's why you see that decline. And just to give you a little bit of history, typical years we might see a couple $1 million. And so these last few years have been good in terms of the operating balance in order to get that to capital. But so this is still a healthy amount, but it is declined from last year. Enterprise funds, which consists of the water and airport, $338.2 million. That's a 9.6% increase. The water division is up $10.3 million. It's addressing many of its capital needs, as well as in the airport is up $9.1 million. And the internal service funds at $52.9 million is a 70.6% increase. Let me explain that. Internal service funds are services charged within departments. And when we get to, we're going to be discussing the police department in a little bit more detail. But in this budget, we have about a new internal service fund to account for those services that were used to be part of the police department, but the other departments incorporated. But now that it's important to track what the department itself costs. We use the mechanism called the internal service fund. So we have those items related to Department of Personnel, the city councilor, equipment services, and facilities management related to police are put into an internal service fund, and the charge for that cost has then been incorporated into the police department's budget. So that's why you see an increase in that category. And as the chart shows down below, you can see the general fund is still the largest of the all the account group or the fund groups at 43.1% of the budget. Next slide. These next few slides, I just want to give you a little briefing on how we are doing in revenue. As I mentioned, the earnings tax before you can see quite clearly where the refunds were and how that hit us in the first and second quarters of the current fiscal year. And also continued a 2.5% decline in the last quarter, in the third quarter of this year. Now, that incorporates, this year they've almost, refund totals to date total about $47.2 million. There's typically about $4 million a year, so that's about $43 million higher than current, than normal, and obviously is driving revenues in that category to fall short. I'm always interested in what the underlying growth is. So there is still, and so when you carve out all that refund activity and look at what the underlying growth is, it was still up 3.7%. So there was still growth there, although it was slower than the previous fiscal year. And under the payroll tax, you can see similar, although less dramatic decline, simply because they also, within that tax also was refunds of about $4.5 million, which is about $3.9 million higher than the previous fiscal year. It also has some, if you discount the refund activity, there was some underlying growth of 0.8%. So they're still there, but it's slowing, and that's notable when you're planning for next year what the trends are. Next slide. On the sales tax, as I mentioned, sales tax we've actually seen decline in the receipts through the first 3 quarters of the current fiscal year. It was down 4.2%. Last year it was up 1.9%. And it's not, historically it's not the sales tax is not a strong grower. 10-year growth rates somewhere around 2.5%, which is higher than usual, simply because in the recent years we've seen inflation. But this trend of decline through the first 3 quarters is a little worrisome. Usually the sales tax, if the economy starts going south, it's usually the first evidence of it is in the sales tax. And so that one's going to have to be monitored going forward. And you'll see in the revenue estimate for next year, we've got very modest assumptions on growth. The use tax, which had been growing even when the sales tax declined, is also down 7.3% through the first 3 quarters. Last year we saw a big increase. Historically, again, on the local use tax, it used to be driven by business investment, and which would see big swings depending on the economy. In recent years, with the online sales and such, it's becoming more like the sales tax a little bit, and that its base has expanded, but it's still a little bit more volatile than the sales tax. Next slide. And finally, just a little indication of our tourism tax. We both have restaurant and hotel gross receipt taxes. Both of these still are showing some growth through the third quarter. The restaurant gross receipts tax was up 2.3%, and the hotel tax was up 4.1%. Again, that's a little off the prior year's growth rates, but it was still in positive territory. And the next slide. This is just a chart of most of our special funds, general fund and special funds. You can see where the general funds projected to fall under revenue estimates. And most of those other funds, except for maybe gaming, are driven a lot by the sales tax, because we have a number of special funds that are dependent on sales tax revenues. And since the sales tax is falling short, those revenues are falling short as well. Some of this is offset by interest earnings, which are actually higher than estimated. But it just gives you an indication about the sensitivity it is, particularly in those special funds, on the reliance on sales tax revenues. The next slide. This illustration is just a summary of the general fund budget and how and what the ups and downs are, both on the revenues and expenditures. On revenues, this year's general fund estimate was $580.8 million. Now, given the large number of refunds for the earnings and payroll tax, as well as the sales tax decline, I expect taxes to fall short by about $16.4 million. Now, in license and franchise fees, there were a number of increases we see this year that were actually deferred revenues from last year. That's a $1.2 million increase. In departmental receipts, $6.9 million, most of that is in excess interest earnings that we had this year. It's about $6 million of that would be excess interest earnings, so, which offsets some of the decline we've seen in other sources. So net, we're seeing about a shortfall of about $7.4 million in the general fund. Now, looking ahead for FY26, you identify anything that's of a one-time nature. For instance, any revenues that were up because of deferred from the prior year. And that was about 8.6, so we take that off the top. But the earnings and payroll tax, this is something that is still being worked out, but in terms of what the real trend is. But you know you're not going to have the 3-year refunds going back 20, 21, 22, actually 4 with 23. And there are also interest payments. That's not going to be repeated then. But there is still going to be, going forward, an ongoing refund level of activity. And so it's yet to be determined what that amount is. For these purposes, I'm estimating about $14 million. This would be about 12 in the earnings tax, $2 million in the payroll tax, hoping that's a conservative estimate. And it'll play itself out next year. It's a little less of a guess this year because we do have some experience, but I guess the big question is, what's the new normal? And this is trying to get us to that new normal and what that estimate is. Other than those adjustments, and then you have net growth. And as I mentioned, we're seeing declines in both the sales tax and some of the other revenues. After those assumptions, net growth I've got less than 1%. So, and that's just indicative of where we think the trend in the economy is going. It's about as slow a growth as you can have without actually saying, hey, we're going to have a recession. It's just that's where we're at. And as I mentioned, the final item there, incorporating about $5 million in interest earnings from the ARPA fund, which is interest, and that's not restricted revenue. So from the budget, so that gives you a $607.4 million base for general revenue. And then compare that to this year's budget of $580.8 million, and then increases there. The biggest change in the area of general government, you'll see some increases like city councilor, added some positions and such. But the two items I wanted to point out in the general government category are on personnel in the city councilor's office. Those were the portion of their department that provides services to the police department, because we want to be able to identify what those costs are, and then incorporate that cost in as an internal service fund. So the reason why those are down is because that cost is moved into the internal service fund. And then that charge ends up as a line item in the police department. On the next slide, Comptroller's office added some positions this year. We did eliminate some vacant positions, but they were up about a net through $600,000. Another item of import as we talk about adjusting pay for city employees, the citywide accounts, this is Department 190 in general fund. There's a line item there for $10 million for potential pay adjustments. There is no particular pay plan at the moment, but this just gives us a little bit of, this gives us some ability to address pay issues going forward in FY26. Elsewhere, the assessor subsidy went up, but there's a CPI adjustment each year to the convention center's asset preservation payment, and so which is another $100,000 increase. In parks, not anything particular they're going there. It's up $600,000, mostly pay and over, and as well as a reduction in a few vacant positions. In judicial offices, the circuit court included within their budget a 4.5% pay increase that includes 3 and 1.5. They had already incorporated it in there, so we didn't adjust elsewhere. If you're familiar with state statute, they submit their budget, and we sort of, unless we have permission from them, we budget what they ask for, and there's a process for that if we wanted to contest that. The other offices were up, like the circuit attorney is $600,000, the sheriff $500,000. That incorporates also pay increases that they've incorporated throughout the fiscal, and as well as, and then city courts, which was Regis was down $100,000, but otherwise no increase there. In the county offices, the biggest change you're going to see there is the election board, simply because there's no scheduled elections or no regular scheduled elections. There might be some small ones as we have from time to time, but the big four we don't have next year. And the next slide. In the street department, there are some ups and downs there, but the biggest change you're going to see in 1.2, that's a net $1.2 million increase in the street division, with the biggest item there being a replenishment of the city's salt supply. If you remember this year, we had actually abundance of salt, in which they utilize. Usually each year they'd use about 6,000 tons. I'm told when we had our budget meetings, they were saying they used over 13,000 tons. And they had over 20,000 in reserves. So what we're doing is the $800,000 should supply at least 10,000 tons. In public safety, the police department has incorporated the pay and benefit increases related to the 7%, or mostly 7% pay increase that was a third quarter of this current fiscal year. But I would point and then it assumes the reduction of officers to that 1,100 figure, which is what was sort of contingent on that pay increase. But the big item I do want to again point attention to is the cost allocation internal service fund. That is the $16.4 million. That's the cost of those services that we moved out for those four departments and incorporated into the police department in a cost allocation line for internal service. I should note the police pension cost went down by $3.5 million, but overall the police pension budgets are up $15.5 million in the general fund. In the fire department, with pay parity provisions, they also went up. Their pay went up by mostly 7% pay that was afforded the uniformed firefighters this year. That was their budget overall. Pay and benefits went up $3.4 million, and also their pension went up this year with an increase mostly driven by the old frozen plan. Overall, pension went up by $2.9 million, with the frozen plan's contribution going up by $2.8 million. Elsewhere in the Department of Public Safety, the big item here in other departments, there was smaller increases in the building division, but the biggest increase is the $2.9 million increase in City Justice Center. That's driven mostly by a $2.7 million increase in their medical contract for Human Services, not much there. Board of Public Service, again, we do have some increases in some of the contractual and utility costs of facilities management and in the contractual fleet services, which is our equipment services division. And then, of course, the biggest changes in that department are the $5.5 million reduction in facilities management and $4.9 million reduction in equipment services division. Again, those were the portions of those offices that performed police services. So those, again, moved over to the internal service fund, and then that line was incorporated in the police department's budget. So you have a total increases of $26.6 million, which brings you to $7.4 million general fund budget. On this next slide, this is a discussion of the general revenue fund outlook. As I mentioned, the earnings tax at $232.3 million, that's actually a 17.4% increase. But that increase, again, is driven by the fact that we don't anticipate the large number of refunds as we did this year. But overall growth, I've got as underlying growth about 1.5%, which is pulling back growth estimates. Property tax at $80.9 million, that's a 2.8% increase. There were some one-time distribution issues this year that were sort of negative adjustments this year that incorporated an adjustment we had from last year that sort of boosted our receipts this year. So, but the underlying growth, if you make that adjustment, is about a 1.8% on the growth side. So the 2.8% growth is from year to year, but the underlying growth is about 1.8. Under sales taxes, as I mentioned, $60.9 million. That's just for the 1 cent and the 3/8 cent combined. That's a 0.5%. I've got a modest increase of 0.5%. Again, we've seen decline this year. The last time we had a dual year decline would be the Great Recession, or aside from the pandemic, but the Great Recession would be that. So we're sort of got a modest 0.5% increase. I did include as a separate line the marijuana sales tax simply because it was new. And I think we had a conversation about that the last time we met. How's it doing? How's it going? It's still been sort of plateauing at that $1.7 million line. If you recall, we had about a $2.4 million estimate coming in. Unless something drastic happens in the last 2 months, we're going to be plateauing around 1.7 million. Again, the payroll tax of $44.9 million is a 6.7% increase, and similar to the earnings tax, adjust for the one-time refunds we had this year. Growth got estimated at 0.75%. Again, very modest growth assumption. Franchise utility tax, $57.6 million. It's a decline of 0.6%. We did get some one-time benefit deferred payments from the airport this year, which we would not have a repeat next year, and that's why you see a decline there. Intergovernmental receipts at $22.2 million. That's a 3.5% decrease. We did get some additional monies from inmate reimbursements from the state, as well as payments for EMS. We do not expect those to be repeat. Why you see that decline. And then license fees, $13.1 million. It's a 7.3% decrease. We last year, this current fiscal year, we received some deferred payments from last year, and so again, you have to look at the receipt trends to make sure that we're not counting one-time money going forward, and so that's why you see the decline. And departmental fees and fines, $58.3 million. It's a 9.6% decrease. That mostly reflected by the we do have an estimated decline in building permits and interest earnings, which we don't expect to see as high as what the current fiscal year. In the other category, $35.5 million, 8.0% increase, driven largely in part, that's where we bringing in the $5 million from ARPA interest. Earnings tax, as you can see in the chart, represents 38% of the job. On the next chart, this is basically an illustration of the expenditures by department. I won't going to repeat myself too much on this slide. It just gives you perspective on the percentages represented by each department. The general government's down 12.8%, mostly driven because of those 2 units that were pulled out into the internal service fund, personnel and city councilor. The non-departmental, that big increase is the $10 million that's set aside for pay adjustments. In the county offices, that negative 2.7% is because it's not an election year. The public safety 8.7% increase is driven by the allocation for the internal service fund, which is incorporated into the police department. And the Board of Public Service, $34.8 million. That's that $19.5 million decrease is again related to the internal service fund creation, facilities management, and equipment services. So that's the general fund. Now, in addition, as you know, we have some special funds, highlighting a few here in the next few pages. Local use tax fund, as I mentioned, the receipts are down 7.3% year to date. So we've got a revised estimate of $57.6 million. Plus, we're appropriating some unappropriated balances into the budget. You can see allocation. There are some fixed allocations. Affordable housing is receiving $5 million of that use tax. We had prior given it 6.5, but we're being the ordinance minimum is 5. But they also have some $1.5 million in unspent previous appropriations, as well as additional revenue payments, which brings their budget to $6.5 million, which is comparable to the current fiscal year. The Healthcare Trust Fund receives $5 million a year, plus additional funds that they have on hand. I'll point out that because within the health division, we have moved some contractual costs into the Healthcare Trust Fund to help offset some of the costs within the health department. So you'll see there, some of those line items are not reductions, but they've been incorporated into the trust fund. Building demolition receives by ordinance $3 million per year, and that has been appropriated there. So the rest of those revenues, $52.8 million, are considered excess use tax fund. And you can see within each category, the city councilor's got a affirmative litigation unit, and the refuse division's bulky pickup. The building division has its housing conservation program there. Office of Violence Prevention was supplemented last year with a special revenue. So because those revenues were one time, this budget is going up by $1.2 million in order to maintain some level of funding there. Fire retirement system, that's part of the cost associated with some recent pay increases. Police and police pension, that's down $2.5 million, it's $21 million. Health department, including inmate health care, is at $13 million, and human services at $1.6. So the total budget for the use tax overall, $67.4 million. In the Economic Development Sales Tax Fund, these allocations are, again, set by ordinance. 60%, the largest portion of that is for transit. It's estimated, as you know, we allocated $10 million for Metro this year, but at the end of the current fiscal year, we still estimate that there would be $86 million in that fund. It will receive another $14.6 million in FY26. 10% of the ECO-DEVO, or Economic Development Sales Tax Fund, goes to the stabilization, comprised of PDA and CDA departments. 10%, and that totals $3.4 million. 10% goes to the Workforce Development Fund, which, utilizing, again, $2.6 million unspent funds from prior years, they have a budget of $5 million for Slate and the Director of Human Services. 10% of the allocation goes to the Public Safety Infrastructure Fund, and you can see that those $2.4 million, part of that is increment to the 911 system maintained by the Comptroller's Office, $100,000 for SEMA and its mass notification system, and for the remainder, it's $1.9 million for continuing the PSAP construction, which is the Public Safety Answering Point building over on Jefferson next to the fire department. And then, again, the final piece of 10% goes to city infrastructure through the capital fund, and that's appropriated in the capital budget. On the next slide, there's another half-cent sales tax for public safety, which is, and use tax piece of that, known as Prop P. For the public safety piece, or the sales tax piece, 66% of that goes to the police department, 28% goes to the fire department, and 6% goes to the secret attorney. Each one of those has a beginning balance there, which are being appropriated. $16 million for the police department in total, 6.7 for the fire department, and 3.5 for the attorney, for $26.2 million of the sales tax piece. And the use tax, that portion is $6.7 million, plus some uncovered balances of 2.3. So 25% goes to the after-school programs. You can see there, Director of Safety, as well as a police cadet program. 7.7% for the circuit attorney, that's $500,000. 25% for rec programs, which with small balances totaling $1.9 million. 17.3% for building demolition, and they're appropriating $1.1 million on hand for a total appropriation of $2.2 million. And then 25% for social work and mental health programs in the Department of Human Services, which including a $726,000 balance, $2.4 million. As I mentioned, ARPA interest, I wanted to highlight this just to give you an update of where we stand there. ARPA has earned about $37.5 million in interest through the current fiscal year, through the end of March. Now, if you recall, there was an ordinance appropriating $15.3 million of that to the convention center. So that left $22.2 million, which is available to appropriate. As I mentioned, $5 million of that is being allocated to general revenue to help balancing the budget there. $6.9 million is to be allocated to the circuit court capital. Once we had allocated the capital budget, we had received communications from the courts that they requested additional funding for various projects, and so that's how we addressed that. And then finally, $10.3 million is being allocated to the city's judgment fund. As you'll see within your budget document, the city councilor's office had requested $10 million at minimum of funding additional judgments as they become available. This will be in addition to the $6 million we have in the budget for, as we have normally had for judgments. On the next slide, on the capital budget. The total capital fund budget at $61.4 million is about a $19.7 million decrease from the previous fiscal year. And as I mentioned earlier, the reason why it's a decrease is because last year, one of the major sources of this budget is the prior year surplus, or half of the prior year surplus. Last year was $36 million. This year is $21.2 million. So it's a decrease. Well, that's still a healthy amount. Go back in history, you're going to see that we don't often have that large of surplus to address capital needs, but that's been good. But in this particular year, it's lower than last year. This also includes $5.3 million in street and bridge projects from the gas tax receipts. And then all the capital funds, as you know, are allocated by ordinance. You can see that by the chart. In the box next to the pie chart, you can see how the 1/2 prior year surplus has been allocated, $21.2 million. And so those are additional items that you can see within the capital budget. And just as I'm sure you're curious, ward improvements have been budgeted at $10.5 million. That is the 1/2 of the 1/2-cent sales tax receipts to the fund. In the next slide, this is a summary of the changes in personnel totals. By the general fund, 4,705 positions, that would be down 184 positions. And then the special funds at 709 positions would be up 60. Now, I should mention that part of that represents the move of about 72 positions to that special internal service fund. So some of that's a move from general fund to special fund. But otherwise, it's still a decline of over 100 positions in the general fund. 92 of those were in the police department, concurrent with that pay increase that was approved earlier this year. In the grant fund categories, it's just down by 2 positions to 184 total, and then the enterprise is up by 3, water is up by 4, and airport is down by 1. In that category, it was 889 positions. So in total, that's 6,487 positions for a decline overall of 117. And the next slide, that just puts this in historical perspective. Over the last 10 years, you can see that the general fund is down by 345 positions. The special funds are up by 253 positions. Grant funds are down by 117, and enterprise is up by 15 for a total decline just under 200 positions, or about 194 positions at that time period. Next slide addresses pension costs. We've seen a slow increase in these costs over the last few years. Budgeted pension costs for FY26 will increase $1.8 million. And you can see in the chart below the 4 systems that, or actually we have 4 systems, 2 of them being fire department, but you can see within the bar charts the increases within those groups. The police system went down by $3.5 million request increase, or the requested contribution. The fire pension system went up by $3.2 million, and ERS is up by $2.1 million for a total net increase of $1.8. The next slide just shows some indications of evaluations and where we stand with the funding status of those funds. From a funded status, we're not they're relatively well funded. They're close to 80%, although you see some decline. When it gets below 80%, you know something to watch in terms of funded status. I think the challenge for us has always been not so much the funded status as the expense and how high it is. You can see, for instance, ERS, that right now we're going to be paying in FY26 17.35% of pay. And that's in addition to Social Security. That's a high amount. Police retirement also 53% of pay. So oftentimes when we talk about pay and how we compensate employees, we're sort of constrained by the fact that our pension costs are so high. And that sort of crowds out our ability to address pay. So that's something, when we talk about compensation, pension is always needs to be brought up into the conversation because it drives much of the city's costs there. But you can see from the valuations, ERS is at 73.5%. The frozen FRS plan is 87.9%. FRP plan is 78.6%, and the police retirement is 80.7%. Again, not bad valuation, but again, it's expensive to keep them there. The other numbers there are what the market value is, and since the system smooths the valuations over a number of years. It just tells you what you might expect. So if the market's higher, it means, okay, the valuation, there's some gains that have yet to be realized, which is a good thing. You want to see that. And so that's positive. But again, the challenge here is more so the cost than the particular valuations. And I should point out the unfunded liabilities across all the systems are $632.6 million. The next slide illustrates what our unfunded, our unreserved general fund balance was at the beginning of the current fiscal year at $153.6 million. As you can see, we've come a long way over the last few years about that. One of the big knocks from the rating agencies has always been we had insufficient reserves, and I think we've done a much better job in the last few years of getting to where we need to be. Again, FY26, I do not have a change there. Simply, I'm not quite sure where we're going to finish that year. I know revenues are particularly to fall short. Don't know about expenditures, where those finish, whether or not we end up with a positive balance or what have you. But that's where we're at. The $153.6 million would be 25.3% of the that's a typo, FY26 budget. The achieved GFOA recommends at least a minimum of 2 months, which would be 16.6% of the budget. So finally, in summary, the total FY26 budget, $101.41 billion. That's a 5.4% increase from the prior fiscal year. The general fund is $607.4 million, is a 4.6% increase. It incorporates earnings and payroll tax refunds, driving revenues below estimates in the current fiscal year. Refunds amounts are to be less this coming fiscal year, though anticipated to show little growth. And then some of the highlights accommodates the full year cost of the FY25 pay increases, 3% for the city general city employees, plus the 1.5% merit, and 7% for plus matrix steps for most uniformed police and firefighters. And it incorporates an additional $10 million increase in citywide accounts in anticipation of an additional employee pay adjustments in FY26. $16.4 million has been incorporated to that police support services to an internal service fund to account for SLPD costs. $2.9 million increase in corrections division, of which $2.7 million is medical increase in the medical contract. $1.2 million in streets, of which $800,000 is for replenishing the road salt supply. $1.9 million for the circuit court and juvenile detention for pay and contractual service increases. $1.2 million for increase in ESD fleet maintenance costs. $800,000 for facility division utility and building maintenance costs. And a $800,000 decrease in the Board of Elections as an off-election. The capital budget's funded at $61.4 million, which is smaller but still healthy. $21.2 million in prior year surplus funds. And $22.2 million in ARPA interest funds, $5 million for the general fund, $6.9 million for courts capital, and $10.3 million in the judgment fund have been incorporated. And the budget is balanced, though showing slowing revenue growth, and tax refunds remain risk factors. And that's the extent of the presentation. Up to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Director. I'm going to go in line of questions from the committee in seniority. And most of the times when we have seniority, it's usually not members who've been here 2 years or less, but I think most of us all have been here not a long time. But in line of seniority, I'll start with Alderwoman Sanye.
Good morning, Director Payne. I just start by thanking you for being here today and taking all of our questions. I think your presentation was very in-depth, so I don't have like a lot of questions for you. I just did, I'm sure this is going to come up, and I've gotten a bunch of questions about it. Could you speak to the recent, we recently passed a proposition, Prop S, for the short-term rentals? I know that's not here in this budget. It's completely, I think we're still figuring out what that is, but it'll help me so that I can craft my emails to constituents who ask about it. Maybe any observations you've seen in any collections, we can expect to see that, or I think they're just genuinely curious because the last thing that they know is that we passed the initiative to collect the tax, and they're just curious about any updates that might be there.
No, good morning, Alderwoman. Yeah, I'm not familiar with the direct revenue yet that we've received because we haven't seen that yet. I think the way it should proceed is once we begin to seeing those revenues come, then you could appropriate the money accordingly, and that would give you an idea. I'm always reluctant to go out on a limb with revenues that we haven't seen, and then I'll give you an idea, give you an example of that. It's sort of like the marijuana sales tax. It's sort of, hey, we've got an estimate, you try to do your best, and 2.4 and it comes in 1.7. So the idea is that you would begin to see revenues, you got a good handle on them, and then you appropriate them when they become.
Excellent. So for any constituents watching who I'm going to email back, that was just a repeat of what I've said, which I think is also, people know that we only have budget once, and they don't realize that we do get quarterly updates and you do report regularly. So I will definitely send them in that direction. Just want to get us on the record in that. My only other question for now before I pass it on, because I don't want to take too long, is could you explain a little bit more about what the Internal Revenue Services?
The Internal Service Fund?
Yes.
Yeah, it's okay. An internal service fund, let me give you an example. Equipment Services buys gasoline for all the departments, right? And each department uses the gasoline. Well, we use an internal service fund where that department buys the gas, and then each department for the cost of that, for the gasoline services. So you'll see within the budgets an internal service line for fuel. Okay, so that's how that works, and that's just that would be. We have another one. The mailroom is a similar. It's much smaller, but it's a similar item where they provide service delivery mail services to departments, and they get charged for that. So that's a mechanism for one department charging for another because it's not new revenue. It's just departments charging each other and trying to identify what the cost is. So in this instance, when we are faced with identifying, particularly given the new state statute on the police department, I want to say, well, what is, there's the police department budget, but then there are costs associated with police that are not within the police department budget. How do we accommodate those, or how do we identify those? So the thinking was, we create this internal service fund. We move the costs associated, as I mentioned, those four major costs, for the personnel, law department, facilities management, and equipment services, the portion that they provide into the internal service fund. So they operate just as normal, but then they bill the police department, and the police department pays that. And what you'll see in the police department's budget is that $16.4 million allocation of an internal service fund as a mechanism for paying those costs and accounting for that cost that we have.
Thank you. And I said that was going to be my last question, but actually, the fire pension, I know you spent some time talking about it. I did watch the meeting that you all had with ENA, spoke about it, but could you speak to the increase you've seen there and that required contribution?
Yeah, all our contributions to the pension system are generated by actuarial reports from the systems themselves. So they'll say each year, again, the pension system's operating year runs through the end of September. At the end of September, each system will do a valuation. So it'll say the valuation as of October 1, 2024. Those reports those calculations are made through those succeeding months, but issued usually in January or February of each year, based on the fund's performance, whether the market went up, the market went down, based on the demographics of the group that we have as of October 1st, your contribution for the following fiscal year, City of St. Louis, will be X. And so depending on, and that, all the factors they use from an actuarial assumption and such, they will send us, basically saying, okay, here's our contribution for now. In the instance of the fire department, it went up this year. Now, why that was, I'd have to look again at the valuation report, and it's available too. They do have a valuation method that's different, and their smoothing method is also different. Most of our plans smooth over 5 years. They smooth over 3. So it could be any one of those, but it's obviously not something you want to see when the increase when you would, particularly if it's a frozen plan. It wasn't something you expect, but that's what it was.
Thank you.
Alderman Browning.
Thank you. Really appreciate all the work that's gone into this. I understand this is a huge task every year, and so we are always very appreciative. Just had a couple questions for you, and then I'm sure as we go through this, I'll have plenty of more questions. But you spoke to, let's see if I put it in here, under the Economic Development Sales Tax Fund, 60% going towards transit. Is this the fund that has been established for the proposed Green Line?
Yeah, for Metrolink expansion, yes.
Okay, and so that's going to continue to grow even though, the project is, as we've read in the newspaper, paused right now. But we'll see that we're expecting another 14.6 million, which will leave us around 100 million by the end of the year.
Yeah, should be, yes.
So that's good news that that continues to grow for that purpose. And I also had questions about the Internal Service Fund. So this is just in response to our ability to tell what we're charging for the police department now that we have to account every single dollar. It used to be spread out, and this
Right.
is a new thing that we're doing?
No, these aren't new things. Prior to local control, the police department had its own personnel department. It had its own legal section. It had its own unit that maintained its vehicles. It had its own unit that maintained its buildings, right? So when the city gained control of the department, what is it going to do? Well, it looks at, say, hey, why would we have two separate units now? So those were incorporated into other city departments. So their facilities people were incorporated into facilities management, and the equipment people were incorporated into the city's equipment. So that was basically an efficiency type thing. So you don't want to have multiple departments. And likewise, on the other way, the police department assumed the city marshal as well as park rangers. But going forward, if we are required to fund the police department at a certain level, it's misleading to say, oh, well, this is the cost of the police department. We'll only look at the police department because we also have all these other major costs. So the idea of trying to identify how do we get those costs in the budget that way, and the Internal Service Fund was the mechanism. I should also point out, I'm sure this is going to be worked out as that transition continues, because there's also something called a cost allocation, whereas you might not actually have a budget for that over there. But let's say the comptroller's office provide just general overhead. There's something called a cost allocation, which also needs to be identified and would probably be incorporated in their budget in a future time. But just so that we're identifying all the actual costs associated, and that is contemplated when we look at what the cost is, or the portion of the budget allocated to public.
Thank you. That's a really good explanation, and I just hope people understand that even though the police are under state control, they continue to work with all of our departments and are still very much a city function in all these ways, but now we have to just account for it a little differently.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Diving into our revenue a little bit, obviously we're a little concerned as we see the early signs of recession, but we see an increasing budget this year for a couple different reasons. I want to make sure our revenue is keeping up with that. And so under the capital improvements plan, I had seen that the gaming revenue had decreased a lot this year. I was wondering why that was.
Yeah, I was just looking at the numbers before it came down. It's down about 10% year to date. I can't address why. I do know that over the years it has been sort of declining. It had been, we used to get over $7 million. This is pre-pandemic, and then it went down to like 6, and now it's, we saw a decline. I can't think of any particular precipitating event other than the fact that they're just getting a smaller share of the market.
Is the city anticipated to get more money from, say, sports betting now that that's been passed?
I think that I'm not sure what final version is out there, but when I looked at the last time, it seemed like the state cut itself in for pretty much any sort of gain there, and HomeDoc was not.
And they're not going to share it?
Yeah, I remember looking at it before, and I didn't see much they might get more foot traffic that might have an indirect effect on their bottom line, but I didn't see much in the city.
That's helpful. Page 36 of the capital book. Sorry, let me just get here. Was wondering, the operating budget, it says that to offset these costs, the capital budget reimburses the departments a fixed amount each year. This is for the Street Division and Board of Public Service. What is the fixed amount that they provide?
Right, it's 1.3 million.
Okay.
650,000 to BPS, 650,000 for streets. And that was a sort of a convention, when the sales tax was first started, you had basically, okay, the aldermen have these projects they want to do, but then they came running over to BPS and said, well, can you design and all this? I said, well, we don't have the people to design that, so they'd have to go out and hire a contract, which was more expensive. So I said, well, what's the better way of doing it? Well, if we can allocate some people to do this, we could do that in-house. And so, for BPS, it's 650,000, and streets, 650,000, sort of allocate to address those kind of requests.
All right, thank you. And I'm kind of curious, just as we see, I know we get a certain amount in ward capital funds for the aldermen. It's going down this year in anticipation of receiving less from that tax. It already wasn't enough money, and I think we all know that. But I've often felt that by splitting it into 14, or it used to be 28 different accounts, we were hiding the fact that we weren't actually budgeting enough for streets, or enough for refuse, or enough for, forestry. When we're looking at the outlook going forward, I'm concerned that, the reduction in that amount, and then when I look at, say, the streets budget, and they asked for, I think, 12 million or so for paving this year, weren't given that. I realize this is the last administration's budget, but I'm just kind of curious where we feel that's going. Is the impetus on us to grow in order to move these budget line items up, or is there potential that we could find a way to put enough money into these basic city services going forward without gaining population?
Okay. All right. Wow. It's
It's
a
a complicated question, but
Yeah,
the
that's large.
basic idea is,
Let me start with the
Yeah.
smaller one on capital. Now, as I mentioned, we have benefited in the last few years more capital than we've seen in a lot of years, simply because we had both the operating surplus, which contributes to capital, as well as some ARPA monies that went to capital. When it comes to streets, we do have one recurring source that is somewhat new, and that's the gas tax increase. And that's going to be there. That doesn't go anywhere. That's going to be going forward. Now, I know BPS always has mentions about, here we need our bridge match and all that, and we can fund that from there. Whether that's going to be enough. I think that's probably going to, the final increase in that goes up July, I think, this year. So it'll probably be stabilizing somewhat less than $7 million a year, which is something that we didn't have before. So that's a good thing that we use for that. But in terms of the revenue not keeping up, I would say that's a true statement. If you look at, and I think I did one of those, I did an illustration for the Revenue Council that met last fall, and it shows what general revenue, the increase in general revenue adjusted for CPI, and you can see a big gap there. I think identifying potential sources that would grow with the economy is a big challenge. We do have a number of fee-based revenues that are fixed that don't go up with let's say a CPI or what have you. It sort of drags. So even if your earnings tax, which by the way is a pretty good grower from our standpoint, even if it's going up by 3, but another third of your budget's going down or just remaining flat, it's a drag on your overall growth. And so I think there are some sources there, like you've got the GBL, you've got other fees. That's the graduated business license. You got those other fees which don't get adjusted for inflation or are rarely adjusted. And I'll bring up service fees that might be more sensitive. For instance, the refuse fee. There's still complaints about that, but that hasn't been adjusted since 17. And our refuse has gone up, our refuse costs gone up significantly since then. Trying to keep our revenues going up is a challenge. And again, you sort of have to present it and say, what's palatable in any given amount of time that people would accept and you think you could get some agreement on.
So we have choices to make, obviously,
Yeah.
and I think the frustrating thing is that even as the city continues to lose population and we see threats to revenue sources, we still have these same costs to pay. Just because there are fewer people in the city doesn't mean there are few people coming through our city, using our roads, using our services, dumping their trash in our city, and yet we still have to be able to fund those departments. One thing I'm a little concerned about is I've noticed that the fees that we collect keeps going down. For say, I'll just use a example of the forestry or building, right? We did have an ordinance last year where we increased those fees. We're hoping that makes a difference when it goes into effect in September. But I'm wondering if the fees that we collect is going down because we don't have people to collect them. Is there some truth to that statement?
Yeah, I'd have to defer to the building commissioner on that one. Historically, you will see, I don't want to judge too much by any particular year on your fee revenue, simply because a lot of that's the economic environment you're in, whether or not building permit activity overall or the economy is going in a way where you are seeing more activity. If you see the economy slowing down, then necessarily you would expect to see building construction and permit activity go down as well, and that impacts your revenue. So divvying that up with whether that's a collection issue or whether that's an underlying growth issue, I'm not as comfortable with assessing right now.
Well, I do appreciate your answers. I mean, you've answered a lot of the stuff off the top of your head, which I find to be very impressive. It's a massive $1.4 billion budget, and the fact that you're here just being able to talk about it without checking your notes is always impressive to me. I'll keep the rest of my questions for later, but I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Alderman Velazquez.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Director Payne, for being here. And I want to echo my colleagues, it is keep all this stuff in your head, and then we just pepper you with more questions. Just a couple of thoughts, clarifying questions. The general, I'm looking at the 5.4% increase, and you may have said this and I missed it. You said all funds, so that's including the surplus that's not including the surplus that we, like the unspent money that we've had in years.
Yeah, that's right. The 5.4 in all funds includes the budget for all those funds, and the general fund includes the $5 million ARPA interest. Is that?
Yes. So it's basically the increases, including the money that we didn't spend from last year.
And again, the bigger thing, and I want to make sure everyone's clear on that 4.6% in the general fund, for instance, looks like a big increase, but it's because we had that big refund activity this year, and you don't see a repeat of that next year. So while it's recovering from that, the underlying growth is still pretty slim going forward.
Great. Well, it's not great, but that's exactly what I wanted to know. So I know that we're bringing here at the beginning of budget season, and maybe I'll ask the chairman if we can have a check-in, maybe halfway through our budget, not halfway through our budget, but halfway through our year to check in. I would be curious to see if you've done projections that are not included in this, and because it's for the future. So for projections on pension costs, projections on, I know we're kind of prognosticating into the future, and we're not trying to do that, but what is that? I know we're looking like next year, but what is that, or this year, but what are our pension costs look like for next year? What are you kind of anticipating? I know I'm getting ahead of myself in the budget year cycle, but.
No, it's actually a very good question, because I do this every final budget document. I do include a 5-year projection. I haven't done it yet simply because I'm trying to get through this budget. But, and that would incorporate whatever the growth in most of our major taxes, plus whatever in most of the pension systems. I think except for maybe fire, include a projection going forward, assuming the assumed rate of return. So I incorporate that. Health insurance typically grows 5% or more a year, and then just incorporating those, and I do have 5-year projections. Now I can tell you that, and this has come up before too, every year you're going to see this gap, and I've been doing this a long time, and every year there's a gap. So it's not the sense that you have a gap, it's what's the magnitude of it. I've seen it where in a recession, let's say 2008, 2009, you might have a $40 million gap, and that's alarming for the next. However, if it's single digits, that's more benign. This year, it was beginning, you saw the beginning of the increase up to maybe the teens, and which is why we had to pull back on a lot of things in this budget this year. So I would, depending, and as I work on that, I'll have to look at the pensions systems. But right now, I would, without having it in front of me, I would probably say you're in that moderate category.
Moderate gap?
Yeah, moderate to where it's not benign. It's something we got to start worrying about. It's not recession, so it's not like, oh, sound all the bells. But it's something that you definitely want to be concerned about and trying to identify potential sources of revenue, which is what the Revenue Council established last year was beginning to look at, and so I assume they would continue to do so.
That's helpful. And Mr. Chairman, can I ask that maybe when you have those budget projections after obviously budget, that you come back and share them with us?
Oh, sure. They are incorporated into the book and put online. If you look at last year's book, it's in there. So I just haven't projected those out yet.
Okay, great. And then my question, Alderman Browning kind of question, thanks. Just kind of looking again, obviously Alderman Browning, myself, and Alderwoman Boyd passed a set of bills related to vacancy and both establishing that we can do special taxing bills and putting liens on properties for the back fees and fines, because do you have any projection on what those might be, or when can we
No, I'd have to get a little.
Okay, and then those don't start until September 1st, and we can building division. And then my last question, this might be another hard, sort of bigger question. Just in your experience, because you, part of your role is to obviously estimate, the budgets, and that, I don't know if it's a gap, but that the question that we always find ourselves in, that we want to increase people's salaries but cut open positions. So can you go through that process, and do you find that process not easy, but are there ways that we could do it maybe better or differently?
Yeah, I get that question a lot these days. I think historically, anytime you have a budget, let's say this was 10 years ago, and let's say you have 100 employees, it's normal that you're not going to have them filled every day of the year, right? And so you might have 5, 10, some vacancies. So, and then you're also struggling to balance the budget. So in any given year, we'll assume, all right, they're going to have a certain level of vacancies. We'll put that number in the budget called salary savings, and you'll see that in the line item. Salary savings, just whatever the amount is, and they typically make it that far. Now, what the challenge has been in the last few years is that we've got much more significant vacancies than we used to, and so it's been continuing. It's been for the last several years. So then the question becomes, well, we can adjust it with salary savings, but then the question becomes, but is this a permanent thing? I mean, is this going to be part of how it is going forward now? Because other than because you really want your personnel schedule to reflect reality. I mean, but then again, you also don't want to put a constraint on the department that's trying to fill positions either. So it's sort of a balancing act. If you recall last year when we talked about corrections a bit, we did reduce their number of their positions, but they still provide services without any issue, and they still had salaries. I think some of the point, it's funny because you'll hear from departments, if it's particularly a position that's been vacant for a long time, and say, well, I'm going to pull that one out. Oh, it's just sort of pushback against it. Wait a minute. this position's been there forever. Is this not going to be filled? So I think there is no necessarily a right answer, but you've seen some departments where instead of filling the positions, we put some money in for contractual. So it's sort of the contractual service is offsetting your lack of ability to fill the position. I think that's probably going to be more common going forward, simply because you're just not going to have the staff. And alternatively, another department says, oh, well, if you increase the pay, then we'll fill the positions. The problem with that is that I think it might be an either or type thing, where you might have sufficient funding for one or the other, but not both. And in that case, so you might be talking about having a smaller but better paid workforce, which might be going. And then to the areas where you need supplement your service, you can have a contractual service line. I can tell you, when I looked at this, that we've got about total funds, about $35 million in salary savings built in. About 30 million of that is in the general fund. That accommodates, that's probably half of the vacancies, just value-wise. So while you might have a number of vacancies that could be eliminated, and you just have to be cognizant of the fact that some of that's already built in. So it's not that big a dollar amount out there. I think from a budget standpoint, the question is, what is more realistic going forward? Do we plan on filling these positions? Again, you're not always going to fill them all, but some portion of them. Or should they be gone away, and we'll see what that salary total is without them, and reducing the salary savings so that we got a better picture of what your department is. It's been a little challenging, and I think every department's going to have its take on it. I do know you'll hear some pushback about eliminating positions, because that's their acknowledgement of the fact that, hey, they're losing the positions. So I think you're going to encounter different ways with different departments.
So 2 more questions, and I promise I'm done. A question for us might be to ask how long that position's been vacant, some of those things in our role here about talking about budget. And then just with the salary savings and that I guess it seems like not such a big number, 35 million. Seems like a lot to me. Is that on par with our peer cities?
What's that?
Is that on par with our peer cities?
About
is that
how much in salary savings?
right, or like how much we have in these, this kind of tug of war between the vacant positions and the money that we're saving but not releasing?
I haven't seen it at the same level of detail. I'm not as familiar with, but I mean that's interesting. I think our vacancy rates are somewhere around the 25% rate.
Okay.
So it's gotten better a little bit in the last year. It's still significant.
Maybe that's something we can look into. But thank you for answering all my questions. No more, Chair.
No problem. There's never, I know we have something after this for the public, but no hesitation if you have questions on this committee to feel like you have to ask them. And to your question, Alderman Velasquez, ideally, once we get done with the budget process and getting this voted out in a ample amount of time, my goal is to make sure when there's different quarter reports, which the director always does a really good job with putting them online, maybe we can have a budget hearing just to kind of dig through those, and as we get maybe halfway through the budget, figure out kind of where departments are so that we're meeting all year round and not kind of getting all that information just kind of at the beginning of it. Next, I'll go to Alderman Devotie.
Director Payne, I appreciate your presentation. As the new guy, I found it extremely enlightening, so thank you very much. I do want to follow up with respect to a term of art that my fellow alders have been using and you've used, and that is salary savings. And I want to make sure I understand that particular term. In essence, that would be that amount of budgeted personnel that isn't spent on personnel. Is that correct?
Correct.
I probably said that very inartfully. I apologize. From your perspective, from a budgetary perspective, what is an acceptable level of vacancy from a planning perspective? You talked in terms of 25% as our recent historic experience. Is there, from a budgetary perspective, is there an acceptable rate?
Yeah, I've never, that's actually a pretty good question. I haven't seen a best practice of what would be assumed, although 25% is pretty high. Now, the question is, and when you're dealing with the positions, is it something that's going to be resolved? In other words, are we going to get, oh, well, this is just a temporary lull and we'll get back up there? Or is this something that's permanent now because of the nature of jobs and the way people work and all that? And I think we're in that period where we've seen several years of this. And is this, and I think the question, it's still, the jury's still out on whether or not it is a permanent shift. Because if it is a permanent shift, then we need to be looking at, well, how do you right-size the TO, the personnel schedule, so that it reflects reality? You address the pay.
And doesn't that then beg the question of how far in the past do we look to determine whether we have a trend or we are looking at a new reality with respect to personnel staffing?
I think you saw this pretty much as a big deal just right after the pandemic. I think before that, it was, you may have had some, but it wasn't, it really became more pronounced since.
From the perspective of scheduling for contractual services, how do you approach that? Is that something that is looked at within the budget?
Well, departments typically would have something, make a proposal of that nature. I'll give you an example, the Parks Department. Now, they did have a request to increase this year. It wasn't incorporated. But they have started identifying parks that are more suitable for contracting. And they say, all right, let's go get some bids. They will provide, we can get these parks mowed. I couldn't recall off the top of my head what those were, but there are several that are being mowed with contract services. And that means that they don't need as many per performance or part-time people to do the work, and so forth. So that Parks is a good example of that. I think tree trimming, there's some of that. Equipment Services Division, the ones that manage the fleet, they do have a big line with contractual repairs.
And then finally, if I could talk to you about the Police Internal Service Fund, because I think that's something that my constituents would be very interested in. There was discussion about major costs. I believe when you were talking with Alderman Browning, for my benefit, can you give us an example or three with respect to what those major costs that are being budgeted on police internal service?
Yes. As I mentioned, before local control, the police department maintained its own sections for personnel, hiring the legal department had their own law staff and all. They had their own staff for maintaining buildings. They had their own staff for maintaining their fleet vehicles. Those are major expenses, and particularly those last two are rather large. Right now, as it exists, they are part of, when we took them over, they became part of the city government. They became part of the city departments, right? So all those people and all those costs got incorporated within the various city departments. They're not part of the police department. So the challenge this year, well, if we're going to be required to fund the police department at a certain level, what about all these major costs we absorb on this side? And how do you accommodate that? How do you accommodate? And so the Internal Service Fund was created to do that. And that's what that is.
Do we anticipate any assistance from the state with respect to any of those services? And I can see your smirk.
The only thing I'm aware of is I do know that when they talk about judgments in their payment in the old arrangement, they would participate in judgments up to $1 million a year. My understanding with the current legislation, they increased it to 2. Okay, that's good. I mean, it's not sufficient to cover the cost of that system, but that's my understanding. That's what
There's some assistance, and my memory, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the state also provided legal help with respect to the defense of certain kinds of cases. That is, the city councilor's office didn't bear that responsibility. Rather, there were assistant attorney generals that were that we're defending those matters.
I do believe that's true. Too.
And do we anticipate, at least with respect to the budget that we will get, that our city councilor will get that kind of assistance?
I believe that might be the case. Again, I'm aware of the $2 million increase, or the $1 million to $2 million increase, as well. If it's the old system where they are also participating in defense, that could also be as well true too.
Thank you for your time.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Director. I have a few questions, just, I guess, piggybacking off of some questions that Alderman Devotie had, and maybe this is a one for our policy associates at the board. With the state takeover, just so I'm clear, and I know you smirked, and I think we're on maybe the same page. Even though it will be, and right now there's some potential litigation, so we don't know what's going to happen. Always better to budget for the worst than not. Is it that even though there'll be a state takeover, we are still, like you say, responsible for salaries, pensions, car repairs, radios, guns, and all that? We would have the kind of burden of still paying for that, even though the state will have more of a say-so over the board of police.
Yes, that's exactly, and that's how it worked prior to the local control this time.
Okay. And then going back to the pension, not pension, going back to vacancy positions, can you, from your history of being the budget director, now we are, I think, in a place of where you say, like, we have a lot of vacancies. Does that also add to, why we have, as I look at our revenue increase over the last several years, when you look at, going back to 2015, we roughly look like we had 12.9 million in reserves, unreserved general fund. And, I would say it looks like roughly around the COVID year, we went from 17 all the way to 42, and from 52 to 68 to, now we're at 153. Do you think because of post-pandemic is why the vacancies are there, or is that something that we've always kind of had in each department?
I should share with you a chart that even goes back further. Because my experience has been for the last 20, well, maybe 30 years, is that we struggled with just nominal fund balance for all that entire time. And I can go back to the recession of 2008 and 9. It took us 10 years really to get back to where we were then. And it was always interesting because the economy was growing, but we didn't really have a breakthrough. You should have excess revenue when, because it should be normally conservative in the estimate, and if your revenue is growing, you should have some surpluses. But it really was very modest. It was 1 or 2 million a year. And then finally, and I point this out, we had our breakout year in FY19. That was pre-pandemic, so it wasn't like, hey, the feds or anybody's bailing us out. We finally had our breakout year. We got hit by the pandemic in 20, although we still had broke even on a cash basis, and we didn't use ARPA to balance. And then since then, revenues have exceeded. I think there's a couple of things going on. And if you look at it, and I think I addressed that in my year-end report, but what portion of it is revenue and what portion of it is expenditures under budget? The revenue piece, I think it was driven a lot, particularly with the sales tax. Our sales tax doesn't grow, was by inflation. Inflation added to our growth in earnings tax, our payroll tax, and sales tax. So if you've got high inflation, I think we saw a couple of years of outperformance on the revenue side, and that contributes to your service. And then on the expense side, the vacancies. So you immediately, okay, so you budget this much, and all of a sudden you have all these vacancies, and so you are underspending your budget, and so that also contributes to the surplus. Now, we didn't have nearly as much salary savings a couple of years ago as we do today, because you say, hey, if you're going to have many more vacancies, I'm going to increase the salary savings. But I think it's been a combination of both. Last year, it was actually more on the expense side than the revenues, because revenues were beginning to slow. So I expect this year is going to be very much narrower, and definitely not on the revenue side. I'm expecting a shortfall in revenue. So it's all going to be dependent on where expenditures end up, whether we have.
Okay. And do you have I guess, a chart of, I'm curious of, have we always had in the city of St. Louis this large amount of vacancies? Is that something that is new post-pandemic or something the city has struggled with before 2020 as far as,
I'm thinking about historically how, I don't have any historical charts on that, but I would say that the amounts that we've seen since the pandemic have been significantly higher than I recall prior to that.
And I know one of the concerns this committee has, looked into last year and like Alderman Velasquez brought up is, like you said, I think one of the things that we've always wanted to try to look at this committee is how do we make sure that, we pay employees more outside of the 3% raise that the previous administration has done. But also, I think one of the things that you're bringing up, if I'm clear, is you don't want to start a cut position and maybe 3-4 years down the line, we see a surplus of new employees and then we maybe can't fill those positions because we've put more money into, I guess, salaries and actually having more positions to do the job.
Yeah, and again, as I said, it's sort of, you're feeling in new territory, and it's a balancing act, which is sort of why you'll see this has been an adjustment over time. I mean, each year, in the last couple of years now, we've reduced some positions to reflect that, what might be the new reality, but it's not in any given year, you're not some drastic big reduction.
I heard you say on the ENA meeting that this budget is like a recession budget.
I think I said it's about as close as you can get to a recession without actually having a recession budget, because I still got that modicum of growth, like the earnings tax up at 1.5 and the sales tax 0.5. I mean, there's not much change you can do that until you're in negative territory. So that was my point. It's basically it's still on the positive side, but it's about as close as you can get to a recession.
And I guess you being always conservative with the budget and thinking to the future, do you expect that we are treading that line to?
Well, as I mentioned, you sort of, the sales tax decline this year is concerning, simply because when you think about how a recession rolls out, the first thing that goes historically is expenditure, consumer spending. And if we see a decline of 4.2% through 3 quarters of the fiscal year, last year we had it in the first half, but it continued. And if that's a little worrisome, because the way it rolls out typically would be you'd have your consumer spending decline, you see a decline in sales tax. Then that moves over to jobs, so you'll see a decline in the payroll and earnings tax. And then maybe 2 years, if it continues, you're going to see a decline in the property tax. That's how it goes. But the first indicator is the sales tax. And that's why when you see something like that, you want to be cautious going forward.
And I know we had a big hit on the earnings tax and which also affects the payroll tax because of the money we had to pay out.
That's right.
And ideally, now that those funds are paid out, I know we still have to, like you said, I think in the future still pay.
Yeah, the big question, there was 2 questions. One is, how big is our liability going to be this year? And I think we've seen that. It's approaching $50 million they're paying out now. But after that, it's how much is it going to be on a recurring basis? What is the actual recurring hit that we're taking to this? And as I mentioned in the budget, I was assuming somewhere around the neighborhood of $14 million, 12 of it being earnings and 2 of it being payroll going forward.
Okay, I just got a few more questions, and then I'll open back up to the committee if they have any additional questions before we go to the general public. I know on the election, there's a 800,000 decrease because we don't have some major elections. Was that accounted? I know that there's a special election in July, which probably won't be that much, but I'm assuming when you created that, it was not accounted for.
No, it wasn't that refined.
Okay. Do they, for the Board of Elections, do they usually have, I guess, surplus funds for that, or would that need like an ax from?
When those things come up, it's typical that you say you'd wait until the later part of the fiscal year to see how that impacted the budget they had. Whether you need an adjustment later in the fiscal year, that'll tell.
And the CJC and the inmate medical, the medical contract that we I won't say created, but, we had to start with, there's an increase of 2.7 million. Do you see that being a continuous costs going on? I guess that's up to the administration if they want to continue that type of medical contract or care.
Yeah, it would be continuous as long as that contract's in place.
Okay. Just a few more. Office of Violence Prevention. Could you talk a little bit about that? I know you said, I think you mentioned like ARPA funds was.
Well, it wasn't ARPA funds. It was they had some leftover. It was in a special fund. I can't recall the name of that particular item, but it was there, but it was one time, and so we used that money last year, and so this year when you get their budget, say, oh well, we don't want to have it reduced that much, so increase the use tax to offset that part. Now there are some vacant positions there that have also been eliminated as well, but they were vacant. But overall, that was intended to keep them somewhat whole with the local amount of money they had.
Okay, two more questions. I'm hearing a little echo on the clerk side, maybe. Madam Clerk? Okay, I think we'll get that figured out. Capital fund balance. Do you expect to kind of maybe see a surplus on that in the incoming years? I know it's down a little bit.
Yeah, well, it will definitely not be what we saw this current fiscal year. So you're not going to have $21 million coming, I don't think. It depends, again, it depends pretty much on how we end up with the expenditures, whether we'll have a half surplus carry over.
Okay. Last question. I know we have like you said, a little bit of an increase in our general fund budget, not general fund, but operating 26 budget for 5.4. Is it usually common though, and I'm looking at the previous years where the general revenue and the expense that we're spending, and that's just the general revenue, that's not all the special taxes and stuff that we bring in, but is it common where the general revenue and the expense annual operating plan is kind of at the same amount? Because I'm looking at previous years where we brought in more on the general revenue side and we were spending less, and looking at this FY year, the same amount that we're bringing in on the general revenue, and this is just one fund, is, if I'm looking at that right,
Which page are you on?
the page 11. So this is just a general fund, not necessarily the
Yeah,
full
that's
budget.
just the general fund.
Yes. Is that typical? And like I said, I know there's other funds that go into our budget, but is it typical that our general fund is usually at the same amount with the, I guess?
Well, that would be coincidental. You're talking about the percentage change?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's more coincidental.
Okay. Because like I say, just looking at the previous years, like FY22, I know it was like, 491 million, and in that same FY, the income was about 544.4 million. So I just seen more of the expense going up, and it caught up with the general revenue. So I thought, is that something to be worried about, or is it just a coincidence that maybe?
Yeah, again, I'm not quite sure. You're wondering about
The general, so in the general fund, you see we brought in 607
Oh, yeah, that's estimated for next year, right?
estimated for next year, and we're expected to also spend. Like I said, I was just curious if typically are we in the same kind of traction with the income and?
Yeah, when the budget's presented, it's always revenues are going to be balanced with expenditures. That's just because that's the budget. Now, the actual results are different. So you're going to see, all right, like I mentioned earlier, the revenues came in higher by a certain amount, and expenditures came in lower. So it was a bigger. That's what's generating your surplus in the last. So, but it'll always be in FY26. It'll always be balanced.
Okay, and then I promise my last question, then I go to committee. I know we are, some of our taxes have been down in the third quarter. Are you expecting, I know you can't predict the future, but what are you looking, do you expect the fourth quarter to?
You know, it's interesting because you go through this, and I've seen it happen two different ways. One is you get a good third quarter, so you project based on those numbers, and then the fourth quarter tanks. And you end up, oh, geez, we're going to start the fiscal year in the hole, and your growth rate's going to match. And then I've also seen it where third quarter is poor, you base your estimate on that, and then your fourth quarter outperforms, and so you start the fiscal year positive. Yeah, I'm not, given that it's only 1 month in, I'm not in a position to say whether it's positive or negative. I just think that given all the information we had at the end of the third quarter, it's a reasonable estimate, properly conservative estimate of what we expect to get next year. And then you just hope you don't see a recession develop in the ensuing months.
Gotcha. Before we go to public testimony, are there any outstanding questions from committee members that they want to ask to Mr. Director? All right. Alderwoman Tanya.
I just have one question. It's a follow-up to what Alderman Browning mentioned earlier. When we were talking about that at the end of the year, we would have almost $100 million potentially for whatever the Green Line expansion. I'm just curious, and you might not be able to answer this question. Right now, the tax is set up for this specific, a very specific project, a very specific use. So if the city should decide that it wants to move into a different direction as opposed to a Green Line, like bus rapid transit or something else, do you know if that would require for us to put that back on a ballot and request it to be changed for that type of use?
Yeah, I'll have to defer to the city councilor on that, what alternatives we have on that.
Okay.
And to that, I believe, I could be wrong, when it was passed, it was for certain uses for potentially Green Line. So if we don't move forward with the Green Line, I think that may have to be another ballot initiative to make sure those funds.
Yeah, which was my question to him, because it is for a specific use that's outlined in the original bill. Put it up for a vote and create the tax, but it was created for a very specific project. So that was kind of my question to him, but you might not know, and I can definitely ask the city councilor.
Yep. Alderman Browning?
Thank you. Just to follow up on a previous line of questioning I had about how we fund our streets, you mentioned the gasoline tax. Just checking the numbers from the past couple of years, FY23, 8.2 million, FY24, 8.2 million, FY25, 8.2 million. Projected this year, 8.2 million. Why is that not changing?
Well, that's a good question, because the 8.2 is the amount that most of the revenue that we were getting from the gas tax before they started this series of was allocated to the general fund to offset the street department. But when this new tax came into effect, there was a small piece, like $630,000. I won't bore you with the history, but it was related to we previously didn't get a county share. We're a city not within a county, and when the rate was increased in '92, the statute gave us the county share, and it ended up being $600,000, and we allocated that to capital fund. So if you look at the capital fund, it'd be the gas tax went to the general revenue, except for this $630 that capital fund. Since the increase, we've allocated all of that increase to the capital fund directly. So the 8.2 is held flat in general revenue. Anything above 8.2 goes to the capital fund. So our total receipts something like $13 million or so to the in total, with the differential in the capital fund. Now, last year, you'll note the gas tax was higher simply because we didn't appropriate all that was there, so it got a one-time boost. But I expect the capital fund piece of that to sort of plateau around $7 million. It doesn't grow. I mean, it goes up with the rate, but it should be about $7 million a year or so once everything's finished and settled at the rate it is going to be in the capital fund.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful to understand. So it would stay flat in the general fund, but the excess goes to the capital fund.
That's right.
Thank you.
All right. Seeing no further questions from committee members, thank you, Director, for being here. Next, we will go to public testimony. If you have not signed in to speak on the budget, you can do with the Madam Clerk up front. And we're just going to go in order of who has signed up, giving everybody 3 minutes. Or 4 minutes, actually. We're going to be gracious today. If you are planning to speak, can everybody raise your hand so we can swear you in at 1? Everyone raising their hand, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? All right, when you come up, just say your name and the ward you reside in, and then you have 4 minutes to speak. Madam Clerk, whenever you're ready.
First, we have this undecided or not determined, Mr. Charles Bryson.
Good morning, Mr. Bryson.
Good afternoon. My name is Charles Bryson. I live in the 8th Ward. I am representing TrailNet. Are we ready?
You may proceed.
Okay. Dear members of the Aldermanic Budget Committee, good morning. My name is Charles Bryson. I'm the policy catalyst for TrailNet. I come before you today to testify concerning the FY26 budget of the City of St. Louis. While TrailNet understands this year's budget may be a little tight, the changes we recommend are cost neutral, will have short and long-term positive effects on our city and the people living in it. Our crash report identified that pedestrian fatalities have increased by 187% over last year, or over 2 years ago. This must be unacceptable to you. To begin to cure this ill, TrailNet recommends creating a planning division, both by legislation and budget, within the Streets Department to continually study and plan for transportation infrastructure, which is both streets and sidewalks, maintenance and repair. The $40 million in ARPA funding will mean nothing in a few years if planning for its maintenance is not thought about immediately. There are already positions within city government, such as a Complete Streets Coordinator, the Bike Ped Coordinator, and the Streets Department Liaison that could begin to populate and utilize the services in that division. Their focus should be on how to decrease the number of interactions between people and drivers, as well as increase the amount of usage of our streets and sidewalks. Second, once again, TrailNet strongly recommends the elimination of the 50/50 sidewalk program. The consolidation of sidewalk repair and replacement funds would allow all residents, greater mobility. The picture that Clerk Higgs shared with you all is a walk audit that was done on the Ville and Greaterville network the Ville and Greaterville Neighborhood Service several years ago. The red lines that you see in this picture says there are little to no sidewalks in those neighborhoods. If someone has a physical disability or impairment, how are they to get around? It is hard for them to walk on a non-existing or deteriorating sidewalk, so they walk in the street instead, putting themselves in harm's way. All sidewalk line items should be allocated to the Streets Department, allowing the Planning Division within the Streets Department the opportunity to evaluate them in light of the TMP and determine the best course of action. Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chairman, you and the committee, thank you for the opportunity today, and I will gladly answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Yes, we will. Alderwoman Tanya has a quick question for you.
I just had a question about, and we don't have to talk about it all here. Of course, we can talk anytime off in everyday life. But when you think about what it would look like to get rid of the 50/50 sidewalk program, do you imagine that it would be 100% funded, and do you imagine that the funding would no longer come from Ward Capital? Or I'm just curious about, what your vision is. I do find the 50/50 sidewalk program to be very inequitable because it costs thousands of dollars to fix, and by the time it gets to residents often in the 7th Ward, even if they had the money 3 years ago, they don't have it by the time it becomes their turn. So I'm just curious about how you envision, if we were to get rid of the 50/50 sidewalk program, how would you envision doing that in an equitable way where the services are still done?
I think there's several reasons, several ways to do that. Primarily, the 50/50 sidewalk program has been useless for years. So it really should be just folded into the Streets Department, and all of that funding, the city's 50/50 should go to the Streets Department. In terms of equitability, you have to do a study. And one of the things, while this will take longer, a study of the sidewalks that we have, focusing on those areas that probably have deteriorating or non-existing sidewalks, would help that process.
Thank you.
All right, seeing no other questions, I agree with you, the 50-50. I just use my ward capital and pay for the whole sidewalk. So that's how I do it. But I think there may be some ideas coming down the pipeline in this legislative session. So thank you, Mr. Bryson.
Thank you.
Next, we have, I'm not sure the first name. Is it Mr. Jolly? Oh, Ndwele Jolly. Undecided or undetermined?
All right.
And that's usually my state of mind. Good
Just-
morning.
Good morning, Mr. Jolly. You just state your name and the ward you reside in.
Good morning. My name is Ndwele Jolly. I live in the 9th Ward, and the Integrated Health Network, where I serve as president and CEO, resides in the 10th Ward. And it's my pleasure to be here with you all today. Centering community health centers, our mission at the IHN is to build capacity across sectors to advance health equity and improve well-being by increasing access to health and social services with an emphasis on communities that have been historically excluded. Our 20-year-plus partnership with the City of St. Louis and the Department of Health has been critical in ensuring that city residents, especially those who are most vulnerable and marginalized, receive access to health care. And simply defined, public health promotes and protects the health of all people and their communities. There are many challenges facing the city, as was raised earlier today, everything from under-resourced schools, unaffordable housing, and access to jobs with livable wages. At the IHN, we endorse the city's strategy to deliver efficient, high-quality services to residents and businesses, transform St. Louis into a thriving hub for business and career opportunities with vibrant neighborhoods, drive inclusive prosperity by improving housing, addressing homelessness, supporting workforce growth through immigration, and ensuring that every child in St. Louis has access to quality education, and build a safer and more just for all by continuing to reduce crime, increasing safety, street safety, improving community police relations, expanding services for at-risk populations, and reforming the City Justice Center. However, we know that without our health, we have nothing. And no clear example of that was the COVID-19 pandemic. How do we deliver services, support businesses, educate our children, and keep our neighborhoods safe without healthcare and public health? The Department of Health represents 1% of the city's budget and ranks nearly last to other major cities when it comes to funding. Over the last 5 years, the IHN partnered with the Department of Health to provide access to COVID-19 vaccinations, help enroll residents on health insurance, and increase access to preventative and health services. If our intention is to drive inclusive growth and economic impact, we cannot do it without our health. I ask all of us to consider what it's like to make a choice between paying for your medication and paying rent, for choosing between taking care of a sick child and missing a day from work. The IHN supports the mayor, the Board of Aldermen, and the Director of Health in centering public health as a catalyst to driving inclusive prosperity. Let's invest in our public health infrastructure and protect the health of our people and communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jolly. Seeing no questions. Thank you.
Next, we have undecided, Mr. Dan Pate.
Morning.
Good morning, Mr. Ann. Just state your name and what ward you reside in.
I am Dan Pate.
Or Dan, sorry, Mr. Dan Pate.
Oh, no problem. Dan Pate. I live in the 6th Ward, Shaw neighborhood. And I'm here undecided on the budget. The budget's tough. It's big. I don't envy you guys with having to make choices about stuff. A couple things about the budget. In researching some of the things, it looks like our pension liability is pretty underfunded, being around the mid-70% for the employees' retirement system of the City of St. Louis. And really, taking a look at everything, it seems like our government is designed when St. Louis had 800,000 people, and we need some drastic changes because we have only 300,000 people, and we still aren't able to provide the services that are necessary to attract more people. Because we still have a declining population. A couple things that could be contributing to that. This is from the strategic land use plan that was just adopted. The top one is a cluster graph of childhood asthma, and you can see in North City it being way worse than in South, and in North City here, the non-white population, and it has a bunch of little dots for air pollution. And specifically, I'm here to talk about the Israel Chemicals Limited plant that is planned to go in 5401 3rd Street, West 3rd Street in North City. That project was fast-tracked, it seemed like, by SLDC with their financial analysis at the Planned Industrial Expansion Authority. And it's a $500 million project, which is a lot of investment. The value of the incentive, it gives 15-year tax abatement, 10 years at 90, 5 years at 50, and a 90% for 10 years personal property tax abatement. And the value of the incentive is only $11.4 million for a $500 million facility. That seems really low. If we don't know how much we're abating, how do we know how much we're abating? How do we know how much we have to abate, is one question. The other issue with that is the environmental aspect of it. The environmental racism that has happened in St. Louis and in North City, especially with the childhood asthma graphs. We are not compliant with the amount of ozone emissions as a city at this point, yet we were asking to build another plant that manufactures lithium iron phosphate batteries that will emit pollution into the area. This is less than 1 mile from the O'Fallon YMCA. This is less than 5 miles from our only water purification facility that uses open pond sedimentation. If you look at the map up on Riverview, there's 7 to 9 ponds the size of a football field that we have the water in, and we let bad chemicals drop through and then move it to the next pond and next pond, next pond. This thing is going to emit all kinds of mercury, beryllium, cadmium, volatile organic compounds, things like that, into the air. And it's very possible, I would say likely, that it's going to be landing in our water system. And are we planning for that? Another thing, this is the permit that Israel Chemicals Limited has filed. It's 29 pages with the state, and the only 2 pages you can see are the first and then the environmental stuff that they plan on emitting. The rest is like this, 30 pages of redactions, completely redacted everything on here. I filed a sunshine request with the state and requested an unredacted permit, to which the state said that they cannot provide one because they awarded the ability to redact the permit to Israel Chemicals Limited. So I don't know what we're doing. I mean, when this is what people say that they're going to do, and we are rolling out the red carpet, SLDC is using an ordinance from 2008 to authorize the abatement on this project. I doubt that that ordinance contemplates a lithium iron phosphate manufacturing plant because there were no wholesale, big-scale lithium iron phosphate battery manufacturing plants in 2008. My time is up, I'm sure. I really appreciate you allowing me to come speak. So I hope that we'll do the right thing and slow this thing down. We can approve another ordinance, but please repeal the one from 2008 that allows them to build this thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Next, we have undecided Mr. Jerry Connolly.
Morning, Mr. Conley. Just state your name and the ward you reside in, and then you may proceed.
Very good. Jerry Connolly, I reside in the 6th Ward. Chairman Aldrich, members of the committee, thanks for the opportunity to testify. Once again, going to focus on some transparency issues. Number one is the city's Sunshine Portal has been defective since December 2023, so that's 16 months. Right now, if I submit a request, I'm able to to view the results when the documents are provided, but those aren't available to the general public to see. Prior to that, since late 2020, the public was able to view all the records that were supplied, except for those from the police department and SLDC. And those records should be made available for general view. So that's priority one. Number two is recommendations on updates to Ordinance 71620, kind of the incentive reform ordinance from early 2023. And I feel there should be a penalty for any non-compliance, whether that's by SLDC or by the Board of Aldermen in terms of processing the incentives, because we've had examples where the procedure with notifying St. Louis Public Schools hasn't been followed. And we also have a situation where you as a body, through the full board and also the HUD's committee, do not have the necessary information in a timely fashion to perform your due diligence. When the WashU project at 4140 Forest Park involving C2N diagnostics, 13 minutes before the HUD's hearing, an email from SLDC was sent to the members of the HUD's committee. And when SLDC was speaking to the HUD's committee, they referred to information on there that couldn't be disclosed because of the nature of the application. Well, some of that information was actually in the board bill, which was just very surprising, and it didn't provide, the public didn't have that information. So the public wasn't able to make informed testimony. They didn't have all the information before them. So what I'd recommend for the board is to update your rules and mandate 2 hearings of the HUD's committee prior to any vote being taken. So that's 2 public hearings of HUD's with public testimony at both. And this also will protect against some false information when the Anders CPA personal property tax abatement bill was going through. At this very location, a staff person with Greater St. Louis cited the value of an incentive, and they said it's worth about $1 million. Well, the answer is it's 2.2 million, and it's in the ordinance. So once again, there was no opportunity for anyone to refute that, which is why I think a second meeting is important. Probably since the last 6 or 7 years, the incentives awarding process, it's like a game of whack-a-mole. It's like the lawyers, the lobbyists, developers, as soon as there's some kind of greater transparency kind of limitation that comes down by ordinance, they'll find a way to maximize benefit to the developer by using different incentives. So the sales tax exemption on materials, while it doesn't impact the city's budget itself very strongly, it's a big benefit to the developer, and that's not disclosed. Like Delmar Divine's up for another phase getting more tax abatement. Back when that was analyzed, the sales tax exemption wasn't included. So I think we have to revisit development projects that have had an analysis before, and when there's a new one awarded, that needs to be included in the analysis, and the prior incentive value reduced.
Mr. Conley, you're at your time. If you can wrap up here.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that hits my main points. Appreciate the opportunity to testify, and see you at the next public hearing.
Thank you for coming.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Next, we have Todd L.
How many do we have online, Madam Clerk?
Just one.
Okay. After
That's Ms. Jordan.
Okay. After Brother Todd, we're going to go to the online one, then back into the room, if that's okay.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Todd Ill. I'm a Carl Square resident. My alderman is Rashid Aldrich, whom we think is doing a good job in our community. We thank him for his commitment to making St. Louis an equitable reality in our city. I'm here asking the budget provider to provide funding for the 6 neighborhoods involved in the Project Connect initiative: JBL, Carl Square, St. Louis Place, Old North, Hyde Park, and Columbus Square. Over the past 5 years, these neighborhoods have engaged in an intense and collaborative planning process
We are now at a critical junction where financial backing is essential to translate these plans into tangible progress. Countless hours has been invested with residents, community leaders, and city representatives to create detailed and thoughtful strategies aimed at revitalizing our neighborhoods. These plans encompass key elements such as infrastructure improvement, economic development, public safety, demolition, and cultural enrichment. They reflect the collective aspiration and practical solutions tailored to address the unique challenges and opportunities within our neighborhoods. It is critical to emphasize that these 5 years have not been in vain. The process has fostered community cohesiveness, strengthened local partnerships, and established a clear roadmap for sustainable development. However, without the necessary funding, these well-thought-out plans risk just remaining mere visions on paper. The residents of these neighborhoods deserve to see the future of their labor realized, and the city stands to benefit greatly from the transformation impact these projects can deliver. We understand the challenges of balancing comparative priorities within the city budget, yet investing in the Project Connect neighborhoods represents an investment in the future of St. Louis. These projects have the potential to generate sustainable economic growth, improve quality of life, and showcase St. Louis as a city that values community and is committed to equitable development. Your support in securing funding for these projects would not only honor the dedication of all those involved, but also ensure that the city does not lose the momentum built through years of planning. I urge the committee to consider the profound impact these initiatives would have on our city. In addition, I also would like to see the city look at putting additional revenues into the street department to address all the broken sidewalks in our neighborhoods. As it relates to city trees damaging these sidewalks. Our disability community could not even access their homes, could not even get into their garages, could not get into their transport, make it get to public transportation because these city trees has damaged and hazarded all these sidewalks around our neighborhoods in North St. Louis. You know, when the private citizens, when his home is damaged, the building division come out, they give them a ticket, they threaten to take their property, they threaten to be able to give them all kind of fines, they put interest on top of those fines, but yet the city has neglected to deal with these issues as relates to these trees damaging these sidewalks all around our community. So I think that the city should look at putting some additional money in the city budget to address those issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Todd. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Next, we're going to move to online. We're going to have Ms. Jordan Braxton to raise her hand to be sworn in.
Ms. Braxton, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
All right, you have 4 minutes. Please proceed. Just state your name and what ward you live in.
I'm Jordan Braxton. I live downtown, which is in Ward 14.
You may proceed.
Thank you. We know that the LGBT community faces a range of barriers stemming from discrimination, prejudice, and stigma, impacting their well-being and access to services and overall to the quality of life. These barriers manifest in various forms, including violence, denial of civil rights, challenges, and in accessing healthcare and employment. We know that we have employment and financial challenges in our community, housing and family formation, legal and social barriers, and also our transgender community faces an uphill battle. So we, as the LGBTQA+ advisory board to the mayor, who our charge is to make sure that the mayor, the board of aldermen, and city agencies about those concerns and issues in our LGBTQIA+ community and bring them to the forefront. So to address these issues and make sure that our LGBTQIA+ community is representative, we, the LGBTQIA+ advisory board, want to propose a $100,000 budget position, including salary, benefits, and funding to support an LGBTQA+ commission. We know that a commissioner position works very well in other cities, such as Kansas City, where they have not only a commissioner, but an LGBTQI+ commission that works with the city to make sure that the Kansas City LGBTQA community is well served. And we would like to replicate and duplicate that success here in St. Louis. That is all that I have. I'm gonna make it short and sweet, and I'm glad to take any questions that you have.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Braxton. I don't see any questions from the committee. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
Have a great one.
Thank you, Ms. Braxton. Next, we have, I'm not sure the handwriting is by Mr. Risa Rain. I'm sorry. Risa Rollins.
All righty. As you come on up, Ms. Rollins, thanks for coming. Just state your name again for the general public and what ward you live in, and you're done. You have 4 minutes to proceed.
Thank you. My name is Risa Rollins, and I work at the Community Health Commission, which is located in Ward 4. I am the CEO of the Community Health Commission of Missouri. So good afternoon to the members of the board. Thank you all for your service and the work you've done in our community. While I'm not a resident of St. Louis City, our organization, the Community Health Commission of Missouri, is deeply rooted and accountable to the communities we serve across the city. And I'm here to urge an increased investment in public health as an essential component of the city's health budget, a continued and increased investment as an essential component of the city budget. Public health is not just a service, it's the infrastructure that keeps neighborhoods safe, it supports families, and it responds to crises before they become catastrophes. A fully resourced Department of Health is key to addressing both urgent needs and long-standing inequities. So we ask the board to prioritize adequate, stable funding for the Department of Health to maintain its workforce and fulfill its mission. We ask investment in modern public health systems and emergency preparedness, and clear, equity-focused measures to ensure that funding reaches the communities most impacted by health disparities. Every investment in public health is a step toward a healthier, more resilient St. Louis for all of us. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right. Any questions? Not seeing any from the committee. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rollins. Could you repeat the ward you're representing? Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Chris Wilcox, undecided.
All right, Mr. Wilcox, just state your name for the public, what ward you live in, and then you have 4 minutes to proceed.
Good morning. Yeah, my name is Chris Wilcox. I live in the 14th Ward. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm so glad so many people consistently show up to the city to engage with the budget every year, as few decisions matter if they don't have actual resources behind them. We know that the city has consistently prioritized overwhelming police resources at the expense of basic services like streets and sanitation, let alone housing. This is before the state took control over the police department, but this has apparently not curbed the city's appetite to feed it more. The state requires the city to fund a police department it doesn't even control at 25% of general revenue. This budget, however, funds it at 29% of general revenue, up from 28% last year. One might say is complying in advance. I'm sure the same state eager to cooperate with federal administration disappearing people off the street for protesting or selling off even others to a concentration camp in El Salvador will be happy with this development if they weren't going to demand more anyway. By contrast, the streets department gets less than 10% of the general fund, while streets are literally crumbling around us, like at least 3 sinkholes that formed after the last storm. Maybe we'll get around to fixing that when a cop car drives into one of those instead of bar PM. Most urgently, people require support for their basic needs, and the cost of living makes it impossible for stable housing. Streets crumble as people are forced to live on them before they're forced to not live on them when the city sends cops to destroy their tents and other belongings. Where are they supposed to go? I suspect it is jail or the grave, possibly both given how many people have died in the dungeon across the street. For another year, the Human Service Department has 0 general fund for programming, making it almost entirely dependent on the same federal grants that were suspended this last year. The federal grants for police, I'm sure, will come in just fine, while the Department of Justice suspends civil rights consent decrees for good measure. Finally, the city should meet its obligations under international law by pulling its financial involvement with entities like Boeing and Israel Chemical Limited for their contribution to war crimes by the United States and Israel, including genocide in Palestine. Our money needs to go to fulfilling unmet service obligations to its people, particularly housing people. At minimum, we need to fully fund tenant right to counsel at the $2 million annual it needs to meet its responsibilities by ordinance. We need $500,000 in the tenant impact fund for the next time a building needs to be evacuated due to landlord neglect. We need $800,000 for shelter and outreach so the next person doesn't freeze to death outside of City Hall. It's time the city spends more on meeting its obligations towards its people's needs than repressing them. At the very least, the city should not comply with fascists at the state and federal agencies, even more than they ask from it. We'll be back again until every person is housed and not another nickel is spent on bombing refugee camps. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox.
Next, we have in opposition, Mr. Justin from the 10th Ward. If you could pronounce your last name.
Eidelberg. Mr. Justin Eidelberg from the 10th Ward, also known as the West Side Mayor. So just state your name, even though I did, and what ward you reside in, then you have 4 minutes.
My name is Justin Eidelberg. I'm from the 10th Ward. What I'm about to bring up may offend some people, but it comes from a place of good space and not bringing the federal government here, specifically Donnie or Josh Hawley. When I looked at the budget, I found 3 things that are in possible violation of some executive orders, and that is equity training through the Department of Justice policing grant, which is $412,000, and it's in high violation of Executive Order 14151, Transgender Youth Services, HHS, Title 10, which is $287,000, and we also have a DEI curriculum development through the Department of Education grant at $150,000. And I just wanted to bring that to you all's attention. As you all know, we got a pretty interesting person in the White House, and this is federal funding. And I don't know if anybody's looked at that when you all were, whoever created the budget, I don't know who created it. But I do not want us to lose federal funding. And I'm also asking, could we look at if there's any funding in any other budgets? I know we have like 40-something million in, I'm gonna call it save money to protect us. Could we reallocate some of that money to these programs so we don't be in the possibility of losing federal funding? That's all I really have. And I'm not here to offend anybody or hurt anybody's feelings. I just don't want us to lose any federal funding, and that could be possible that we could be going after. That's really it.
All right. There's no questions from, go ahead. Alderwoman Sanya has a quick comment.
Thank you for being here today, and thank you for lifting these up. I would highlight just strategically, if you find these types of things, especially knowing the climate of the federal and state government, when you come to a meeting and you say it on record and you put it on notice in front of us, that doesn't always allow for the most strategic response.
Oh, I'm
so no worries at all. I think it's totally fine, but I just think like moving forward, if you find this thing, you're able to reach out to your alder directly or someone else, I'm sure we can totally have those conversations. I just want to make sure, you know, we're putting ourselves in the most strategic position to address things and move forward on these types of matters.
So I apologize, Alderwoman. I didn't think about that. I just remember we were having public comment. I'm not trying to put anybody here on Front Street. I just knew this was a public comment, so I apologize. And moving forward, I will do as suggested.
Thank you.
No apology needed, Mr. Eidelberg. It is a public hearing, so appreciate you coming and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Mr. Eidelberg. Next, we have Mr. Brian, is it Eagles? Egan. Could you please state your ward for me?
Yes, I currently live in U City. I'm here speaking on behalf of the safe haven that we were running in your ward, actually, at Grace House.
And if you just state your name for the microphone so they can hear you.
Brian Egan, E-A-G-A-N.
You may proceed.
Thank you. For several decades, a group of mainly volunteers has coordinated the outreach for shelter during extreme winter weather in St. Louis. They have evolved and outlived through many administrations, and with the new administration and budget, it's important to emphasize that something has to change with how we're doing this outreach. Every year there's a cry of we can't have another winter like this again, and then we do. This usually comes up after one of our neighbors dies in the street. This year, Jennifer Pendleton. She died trying to stay warm around a sewer lid that was emitting steam right across the street. You could throw a rock and hit her from here. This is a problem most acutely in winter, but that problem doesn't go away in winter. Get Help, the official referral method for shelters in St. Louis, recorded 508 households turned away from shelter in March. That's not people, that's households. So you're talking parents, children, the whole lot. And according to the shelter utilization dashboard, we've been over at 97% for the past 27 days without break. There are not beds. In addition to being the right thing to do, funding emergency shelters makes fiscal sense. I can speak as the former director of the St. Patrick's Safe Haven Grace House as to outcomes. Over my time there, we placed 127 people into stable long-term housing. 75% of those people had not enrolled in new homeless services within a year of placement. The National Alliance to End Homelessness calculates that a chronically homeless person costs taxpayers $35,758 people per year, mainly through emergency services. With those 127 people would have cost $4.5 million to the city of St. Louis had they not been housed. We accomplished this on a budget of just over $1.1 million, meaning we saved $4 for every dollar invested in our program. It's not only the right thing to do, it is one of the most efficacious St. Louis City programs. And so I would ask of you today that we fund a new Safe Haven stand-up in St. Louis. I have a detailed budget here. This is not speculative. This is based off what we have previously run. It is very accurate. It's something that we've proven we can do year over year. And another $800,000 to cover winter emergency services. We needed about 400 beds last year. We opened up 120 and kind of squeezed a lot of people into that. I have for you all to review today a statement of need, an executive summary, and a budget for how this would work. Again, none of this is theoretical. We have done it before. We have people that can do it. We just need the funding and a place to stand up. I will leave the rest of my time. If anyone has questions, I'm more than happy to talk about this for a very long time.
Any questions? I'm gonna go to Alderwoman Saunier, but first for those documents you have, I'm not sure if you probably sent it to the clerk, but if you want to provide them to our Madam Clerk so that they can be in our drive so all members can have them, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, happily. And I will have something in a day or two from Audrey Umis, who runs the winter outreach for Mission SDL, sending me some information over for the winter shelters. I have mostly in my capacity as the director of the Safe Haven.
Okay. When you send that over, if you just want to send it to, I think it's BOA meetings at stlouis-mo.gov, those documents so that members can get them and that they're in the drive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Alderwoman Saunier?
You actually just, I was just gonna ask that you share that, and also if your testimony, if you have text of it, I would love to get that on the committee would as well.
Yeah.
But maybe you can email that to us. I do know, I've had conversations with a lot of providers who have gotten funds through ARPA or other sources that are running out, and totally had conversations about the amount of beds that we're falling short on. I don't think, this is the best setting for that conversation, but can say that have been having a lot of conversations and also have heard that the administration is beginning to have those conversations. And so thank you for coming here today, and I certainly plan on following up.
Wonderful, yeah. And Grace House was funded through ARPA dollars that ran out, which is why we were forced to close in April. So during this crisis, we've actually lost shelter beds as well.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you again. Just submit that over to the Madam Clerk so we could have those. Okay. If she'll end up probably passing them out or have somebody pass out, but make sure it's recorded. Thank you.
Next, we have Ms. Alvania Creighton.
All right, Ms. Cream, as you come on up, just state your name and the ward you reside in, and after you do that, you have 4 minutes to proceed.
Good morning. I'm Alvonia Creighton, and I'm a resident of the 8th Ward.
All right, if you could just speak a little bit into the mic so they can hear you.
Sure. Good morning. I'm Alvonia Creighton, and I'm a resident of the 8th Ward. And I'm here to urge this administration to permanently and fully fund the Right to Counsel program. Unfortunately, I do not share the same opinion as Mayor Spencer, who has publicly stated that the program is a waste of money. On the contrary, this initiative has already provided critical legal assistance to 721 individuals, and the need is far greater given that approximately 5,000 evictions occurred in St. Louis last year. The current contract for the Right to Counsel program allocates $685,000 over 2 years, which is simply inadequate to meet the demand. To be truly effective, the program requires an annual budget of $2 million. Additionally, I urge an increase in funding for the Affordable Housing Commission to support neighborhood stabilization. The city's stock of affordable rental housing is declining each month, and this commission serves as a crucial resource for preserving and expanding access to affordable homes. Its funding supports a range of housing needs, from emergency and transitional housing to rental affordability. This investment is particularly vital for low-income tenants, as initiatives like the Neighborhood Vacancy Initiative ensures that vacant properties, often owned by speculators or negligent landlords, are converted into affordable housing managed by responsible owners. I have personally experienced the hardship of housing instability due to redlining, gentrification, and urban renewal. In 1967, a month before I was born, my parents purchased a home in St. Louis County, where I lived for 42 years. However, in 2009, I, along with 6 other families, were forced to leave our homes due to actions taken by a developer/non-for-profit organization claiming to build affordable housing. Since then, I have struggled with housing insecurity, a reality that underscores the urgent need for strong housing protections and investments in affordability. I urge this administration to prioritize these necessary funds and ensure that all St. Louis residents can access stable, secure housing. Secure housing profoundly impacts individuals and communities in multiple ways. Stable housing reduces stress and exposure to harmful conditions. I'm sorry to remind us that an unhoused woman died of hypothermia last winter. Homelessness and housing insecurity are linked to chronic illness, depression, and anxiety. The impact in education: children in secure housing attend school more regularly, perform better academically, and achieve better long-term educational outcomes. Employment and income stability. Housing stability allows individuals to maintain jobs and pursue career growth without the disruption of frequent moves or homelessness. Safety and security. Secure housing reduces exposure to violence and crime, particularly in communities with high rates of housing insecurity. Social conditions and community. Long-term residence in a stable home promotes stronger relations with neighbors, community resources, and support networks.
Yeah, ma'am, that's your time. If you can, I want to make sure you wrap up to your last point, but.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
General impact: families with secure houses can build assets, provide better opportunities for children, and break cycles of poverty over generations. Thank you all for your time. Have a great day.
Thank you for your time.
Next, we have, I believe this is Damon Starks.
All right, Mr. Starks, when you come up, just state your name for the record and the ward that you live in.
All right. Hello everyone. My name is Damon Starks. I am a resident of the ward, and also I am the housing justice organizer, Action St. Louis.
All right, could you repeat your residence you stated?
The 11th Ward.
11th Ward. You can proceed, Mr. Starks.
All right. Well, with the budget, I am indifferent with this budget. We need to fully fund a few things for renters and the unhoused. One is fully fund rights to counsel. This has already been passed, so this should not be a problem. This has been going on for a couple of years now with the right to counsel situation, so let's fully fund that. Given with the number of evictions just last year alone, which was at 5,000, right to counsel will at least need $2 million to be fully effective. So let's increase that budget and fully fund it. Second, increase the impacted tenant fund to 500K. We have to remember that some residents can't even call the city to report and file a complaint due to the simple fact of the horrific living conditions here in St. Louis homes that they're renting from. And this is not on the renters. This problem is not on the renters. This is a lack of accountability that has been going on in the city of St. Louis on these landlords. We need to fully do investigation on most of these landlords in the city of St. Louis, truth be told. Even with that, so my last two final things that I need to say is, let's support and bring back the warming bus situation that was going on for the unhoused. We had a warming bus for the unhoused, and that was defunded. We need to bring that back. Just last year alone, a lady died right across the street trying to stay warm just because she froze. That is unacceptable. We need to bring that back. We need to put money into these shelters that needs that fund. And last but not least, let's increase the funding for affordable housing. We have to remember with the housing stock here in St. Louis, you got a declining population. Plus, on top of that, housing is just hard to find on affordability level. So if we increase the affordable housing, this will not lead to more homelessness, which will also lead to another greater economic problem for the city of St. Louis. Let's support funding affordability housing here in the city of St. Louis. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your time.
Next, we have Aja Owens or Asia Owens.
All right, Ms. Owens, as you come up, just state your name, the ward you reside in, and then 4 minutes to proceed.
It was morning, but now it's afternoon. So good afternoon to the committee.
State your ward for me.
I'm not, I don't have a ward, but I'm represented in the 4th ward on behalf of the organization.
Thank you.
So good afternoon to the committee, and thank you for this opportunity to speak today. My name is Asia Owens, and I serve as the Advocacy Mobilization Manager for the Community Health Commission of Missouri, also known as CHCM. CHCM is a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to eliminating health disparities through equity-centered, trauma-informed care approaches and system-level change. I come to you in my professional capacity and as a former elected official, congressional outreach representative, and community advocate who has proudly served through the constituents in your community for more than 20 years. I'm here today to express strong support and full support of sustained public health funding. As we all know, public health is focused on protecting and improving the outcomes of every community in every ward, every person through prevention, promotion, and protection as outlined in the Department of Health's mission. With Missouri ranking as 47th out of 51 states in terms of healthcare access, quality, efficiency, and outcomes, we cannot afford to lose focus. Right now, we cannot afford to lose focus or funding. St. Louis City faces multiple intersecting public health crises that our health department is actively at the forefront of addressing. Violence and safety continues to be a pressing public health concern within our communities, and St. Louis has one of the highest crime rates in our country, as we know. The high crime rate negatively impacts mental health, stress levels, and overall well-being. The department's Mental Health Bureau addresses these negative effects through crisis response, education training, and critical interventions like Narcan kit distribution. With the alarming rate of HIV and STI cases in St. Louis, the Department of Health has taken the lead on prevention, education, and health literacy efforts to better understand and respond to the community needs with care and with support. With an uninsured rate of 11.8%, well above the national average of 8.6%, and looming cuts to Medicaid, our communities are at a critical juncture. Disinvestment now would deepen existing health disparities and leave thousands without essential care and prevention services. In the face of these challenges, CACM has partnered with the city's Department of Health to implement collaborative, community-driven solutions. These efforts have included Prepare STL, which is a regional campaign implemented during the pandemic to support overlooked neighborhoods, community listening sessions, which capture valuable insights from St. Louis residents regarding healthcare access, advocacy efforts, prevention, and what it looks like to build a healthy St. Louis. We've also partnered to develop and implement the Health Department's comprehensive health equity plan, which lays out a long-term strategy to confront systemic disparities and expand access to care. Investing in public health will have a positive economic impact. Improve access to expansion of public and preventative health services, create healthier communities. Studies have shown that when communities are healthier, the cost of our healthcare decreases, our workforce productivity increases, and overall quality of life outcomes improve. We encourage the committee to protect the health of all St. Louisans through continued support and increased funding to the Department of Health. We stand ready as a community-engaged partner to create healthier and more resilient communities across all of St. Louis City. Thank you for your time, commitment, and continued investment in our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Miss Kristen Simpson, or is it Mr. Kristen? Miss Kristen Simpson.
Hello, Ms. Simpson. Just state your name and the ward you reside in, and you have 4 minutes.
I'm Kristen Simpson. I still own property and grew up in Ward 13, and I've been working in Ward 10.
You may proceed.
All right, so good afternoon. My name is Kristen Simpson. I proudly serve as the Vice Chair of the Board of Health and Hospitals under the leadership of Dr. Mahdi. I am also Chair of the Community Engagement Committee on that board. I am a nurse practitioner and someone who grew up in the city and has direct, deep ties to the success of the city's efforts. Right now, I provide care at a public health clinic, the bullet-related injury clinic spearheaded by Dr. Punch, offering comprehensive free services to survivors of bullet-related injuries. And that clinic just lost over $1 million in Department of Justice funding for critical services. This is the human cost of underfunding public health. So let me be clear, public health is not a luxury, it's a necessity. It's the foundation of our city's well-being. Yet the Department of Health receives just over 2% of city's budget. That's 2 cents on the dollar to protect the well-being of nearly 30,000 people that reside in your city. So I think we need to kind of let that soak in a little bit. National's best practice suggests that at least 5% of a city's budget to truly be an effective health department. And while I know we may not get to 5% overnight, it is time for us to start moving towards progress. When we inspect restaurants to prevent foodborne illnesses, that's public health. When we ensure that people have clean drinking water, that's public health. When we respond to viral outbreaks like the measles resurgence we're seeing across the country, that's public health. When we monitor jail health care from across the streets and make sure that all humans have access to quality care, that's public health. When we protect our children and families by ensuring the housing is free of toxic substances like lead, that's public health. And then here's the crisis that's very personal to me, that Black birthing individuals in Missouri are dying at an alarming rate while trying to expand and grow their families. That's a public health crisis. one we must confront with urgency and not silence. In our most vulnerable neighborhoods, Black, brown, low-income communities who pay the highest price when the system is underfunded or delayed, the same communities who are told to just pull themselves up while their zip code determines their life expectancy. People who aren't well can't work. Families who are sick can't thrive. And when public health is underfunded, we all pay the price in disease, in lost lives, and in deepening inequities. Public health protects our economy, our schools, our homes, and our future. We are not asking for charity. We are calling for strategic investment. For a city that claims to care about equity and safety, it must start with resourcing the systems that keeps us all alive. Intentional investment in our Department of Health will pay dividends in lives saved, families stabilized, and communities empowered. Because when public health works, it's invisible. But when it's missing, it's deadly. And I promise you, we are seeing that every day on the front line. This is our chance to move differently and to fund public health like our lives depend on it, because it does. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Grace Cobble of the 9th Ward.
Good afternoon, members of the board. My name is Grace Cobble. I'm a resident of the Grove neighborhood in Ward 9. In my professional capacity, I serve as the Senior Manager of Communications and Storytelling at the Community Health Commission of Missouri, which is located in Ward 4. As you've heard from my colleagues, Risa Rollins and Asia Owens, our organization is deeply rooted in and accountable to the communities that we serve across the city. I'd like to reiterate the points of my colleagues and other community members who have spoken, that the City Department of Health is a lifeline to the health and prosperity of St. Louis. I urge you to fully fund and strengthen the Department of Health by ensuring stable funding to maintain and grow its workforce, by investing in public health infrastructure and emergency readiness, and applying an equity lens to ensure that resources reach those hit hardest by disparities. Public health is, by definition and mission, prevention, promotion, and protection, but it's also progress, and St. Louis deserves nothing less. Thank you for listening and your commitment for a healthier city.
Thank you.
Next, we have Ms. Inez Bordeaux of the 3rd Ward.
Good morning.
Just state your name, Ms. Bordeaux, and the ward you reside in, and you may proceed.
Inez Bordeaux, 3rd Ward. My name is Inez Bordeaux. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Deputy Director of Organizing.
If you could talk a little bit more into the mic, so I want to make sure they hear you at home. You can turn it. There you go. And there you go.
You know, I'd be projecting. My name is Inez Bordeaux. I live in the 3rd Ward. I am the Deputy Director of Organizing at Arch City Defenders. I am also the committee woman of the 3rd Ward. I feel like this is like my 50th budget cycle that I spent talking to you all. I'm happy to see new faces on the committee. I'm hoping that means that we're going to get some new results coming out of this committee as it relates to the budget. The things that I would like to see in the budget coming out of this committee is services for the unhoused, especially given the climate that we're living in, losing grant money, being our federal government being taken over by fascists. So I would like to see a lot more of our budget money focused on outreach for the unhoused community. I'd like to see an increase in the number of shelter beds that are available. At any given time, we have about 1,500 unhoused people living in the city with only about 600 beds available. I would like to see the Affordable Housing Trust Fund fully funded and an increase in that funding. There's 3 things that you can count on in the summer, every summer: death, taxes, and downtown business owners complaining about the number of children. that are unsupervised in the streets. So I'd like to see significant funding for youth services. I want to see all of our pools opened and staffed with the appropriate number of lifeguards. I'd like to see all of our community centers open with extended hours during the summer, fully staffed with an increase in the amount of programming that is available, more than just basketball and an empty gym. I'd like to see some of our budget reflected for resources for the 20% of SLPS kids that are currently unhoused, including those dealing with food insecurity. A lot of our kids that go to SLPS get 2 meals a day, and those are the 2 meals that they get at school. So what happens when school is out in the summer? We have an unconscionable amount of children that are going hungry when they are not in school. I would like to see the Impacted Tenants Fund fully funded. As someone who is currently dealing with a slum landlord, like, I'm personally affected by this issue, and I like to see the city do more to address it. Right to counsel, although all being the law of the land for 2 years now, does not have enough funding in order to have the impact that we fought to get this bill passed. We're not seeing the impact that it should have had because it doesn't have enough funding and aren't able to serve enough tenants. Lastly, I would like to see more money put into gun violence prevention programs like Show Me Peace. As someone who lives in the 3rd Ward, we have a huge gun violence problem in the 3rd Ward, but not enough sites to service all of the needs of the community. Well, actually, this is the last thing. I would like to see more resources put toward addressing poverty. Every single study says that it doesn't matter how many police you put on the street, it doesn't matter how many jails you build. When you have upwards of 30% of your population living in poverty, crime is not going to decrease. And if we want to decrease crime, we have to make a concerted effort to decrease poverty. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bardo.
That will be all.
All right.
No, we have one more that just came in online, Ms. Rachel Hurtado. STL is not allowing me to switch her over. Could you give me permission?
All right, Ms. Rachel, if you can raise your right hand so we swear you on in. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
All right, just state your first and last name and the ward you reside in, and you have 4 minutes, so you can speak.
Thank you. My name's Rachel Hurtado. I live in Ward 7, and I'm giving testimony today to lift up House the People demands from the People's Plan for St. Louis City. First, I want to talk about the Affordable Housing Commission. I want to see substantial increases in funding for the Affordable Housing Commission, specifically within the neighborhood stabilization, transitional housing, and homeless prevention and shelter buckets. If any of you have not reviewed the recently released 2-on-1 data, I encourage you to do so because the outcomes are beyond abysmal. It's clear that the systems that we have in place, that our city government tells people to use, right? Call 211 when in need of shelter resources or housing assistance, finding an affordable place to live. That system is failing our city. In 2024, 6,456 people called 211 for help with housing, and only 147 of those thousands of calls were referred to shelter. And most of us know what referred to means. Whether they access that resource is a whole other question. We need massive investment of our city budget into affordable housing, both creation and preservation now. And the benefits will be reaped in so many areas, including public safety, employment, substance use, poverty reduction, health, as we've heard many folks advocate for increased funding for the health department and health services today as well. Secondly, funding unhoused outreach support, including funding for city-run shelter access points during inclement weather. The city should not rely on an ad hoc volunteer infrastructure that comes together every year and shows up for unhoused neighbors for winter outreach. It is a testament to the power of people who organize, but our City Department of Human Services should not have to rely on volunteer support to prop up infrastructure to save the lives of our unhoused neighbors during that freezing weather. And that's exactly what happens every year. It's time for the city to make unhoused support a priority, including funding for winter outreach, and also ensuring that these support services are funded from the general fund, not from unpredictable, quickly disappearing federal HUD funds. We have to have something in our budget for our unhoused neighbors and not just rely on these funding streams that are being cut every day by the federal government. Third, increased funding to the Impacted Tenants Fund. The current allocation in the budget is nowhere near the cost of what is needed to support tenants who are displaced when the city condemns unlivable properties. People know that they can't turn to our city government for help when they face harmful, dangerous living conditions because they're afraid of being displaced. They're afraid of their house being condemned and them being out on the street with no support. The current pattern of individual homes and also these large complexes of affordable housing like Heritage House, those deteriorations will continue. And when they go offline, we see what happens every time. The home is condemned, people are displaced. And it's almost always folks who are elders in our community, people who are disabled, on fixed incomes, Black, and have no options for immediately available, affordable places to go. And lastly, sort of tied to the Impacted Tenants Fund as well, I want to talk about fully funding the Right to Counsel program. The current program, the people who staff it work hard, but they have to shut down the intake line every week. And I don't know if the budget committee members know that, but if you don't, now you do, that program is not functional. Over 5,000 people in St. Louis City got eviction filings last year in 2024. And this program has been able to serve 700 residents, which is great, and they're doing impressive work with the resources that they have, but it is extremely underfunded. I went to Kansas City this past week, and I wanted to talk to their city about the Right to Counsel program in KC. I talked to the program administrator, and they said that their Right to Counsel program is funded from the general fund of Kansas City, and they increased funding for the program from $2.3 million a year to $2.7 million this next fiscal year. And they see over 90% of people who get eviction filings are able to stay in their homes and work out those cases in ways where they are not displaced and their lives are not deeply disrupted for decades to come because of those evictions.
Ms. Rachel,
Why is St. Louis
that was your time.
funding the Right to Counsel program the same way that Kansas City is? We need to see that happen now, today, fund the Right to Counsel program. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
That will be all.
All right. So next order of business, we'll move to point number 5, resolutions for review. There isn't any. Number 6 was committee discussion, which today we talked about the budget and the public comment. And I do want to thank everybody for coming out today, for making your voice heard. I know this year we really do plan to make sure that community voices are uplifted. We plan to have 3 more meetings, 2 in the community, which we're working on. Ideally, hopefully next Saturday, once we get a date, everyone that attended, we'll try to make sure that you know about those meetings as well as they're being public, as well as another meeting in a Saturday. And then before we vote out the budget, hopefully June 2nd, we will also hear from the community again. So from the bottom of my heart, and I know everyone on this committee, thank you all for being here and making sure your voice was heard, because it is going a long way. Number 7, acknowledgement of any written testimony, Madam Clerk.
No, not at the time.
All right, we have announcements, just announcements to the committee. Tomorrow we'll start again at 9:30. I want to thank all committee members for being troopers. I know when you guys signed up, you knew it was going to be some long meetings. Tomorrow we'll hear from the Mayor's Office, Director of Public Safety, SEMA, and then the Comptroller Office wrapping up at 12. Are there any other announcements from any other committee members? Seeing none, excuse members. I want to just make note that the Alderwoman from the 12th will not have an excuse absence because I was not made aware of. Outside of that, everyone else was present, and I'll take a motion to adjourn. All right, all in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you guys for coming.